8 years ago, a huge, evil dragon opened its mouth over 5 heroes. These people are the only ones left alive, and they defeated the mad dragon and saved the world. One of these guys was the crown prince of the empire, a sword master named Kirk. The second was the son of the duke and was a white magician named Axel. Another of these divine men was a saint of the central temple, the groom of light, Baal. Also, the leading genius of the Imperial Academy, he was a spirit summoner named Servian. And finally, the boy in the huge black hat was truly the great despair mage Graceline. The little girl sat on the ground and thought about why only she was given such a dark title. The former great mage of despair, Graceline, and the current youngest daughter of Duke Elfanad, Leisha Elfanad. The girl only recently remembered her past life. In front of her was a bright purple screen on which a message from heaven had arrived. The trial period of reincarnation would soon end. The girl clutched her head with both hands, not understanding what these memories were. The boy gave the teacher a gift from Mr. Servian. The girl, surprised, asked what kind of gift Servian had sent. The boy replied that he'd been told it was an ancient document, but he didn't know the details. The magician wondered again who in their right mind would give such a gift. The guy explained that he said that when she was bored, she could decipher it. When the girl unfolded this paper, she looked at it and said that it looked like some kind of contract. She wondered what would happen if she signed it, and the magician put her signature below. The girl began to remember and, clutching her head in her hands again, thought about how she had signed that contract. She thought nothing had happened and had simply thrown it away. The girl realized how bad things really were. That meant the contract had been made in a past life, and they wouldn't even let her cancel it. What are these heavenly coins, and what are they anyway? This is definitely not some kind of illusion or hallucination. She decided to let things be as they are, but who would have thought it would turn out this way? Having defeated a mad dragon in her past life, she won't allow some window to bully her. The system indicated an exclusive bonus for the first subscriber, and she would receive the title of Saint, which was applied automatically. Leisha sadly said she wouldn't be purchasing either the Saint or the subscription. The system asked to pay attention that if the remaining subscription period becomes 0 days due to non-payment of the subscription fee, it will die immediately. She was simply shocked by the fact that if she didn't pay, she would die. Clutching her face again, she tried to understand what kind of reincarnation this was. Leisha realized she needed to understand the situation. In her past life, after defeating the mad dragon, she became consumed with research into black magic. Then, she accidentally sensed the energy of the mad dragon and found the place of the decisive battle. At the moment when she was wondering about the energy of the mad dragon, she was overcome by an unknown powerful force. She clenched her hands as a bright yellow light attacked her from all sides. This was her last memory as Graceline. That is, the Graceline in her past life had died. Afterwards, she was reincarnated in Leisha's current body. The system congratulated the girl on her reincarnation and the purchase of a monthly subscription for just 10,000 heavenly coins. If she hadn't paid, someone would have died, and the girl would have thought life was cruel. This essentially means she only has 3 months left. What's the point of this reincarnation anyway, if that's how they treat her? The child was told to clean the entire house with a simple broom. She was so lazy, she decided to simply use magic. Duke Elfanad's grandson, Noah Elfanad, appeared on the doorstep. He exclaimed that she had been told to clean up and asked why she was loafing around. At least she knows how scary Madame Jesper can be. If she doesn't want to rewrite the etiquette book again, she'd better do it right. Leisha thought about this nephew who never got tired of tormenting her and why he hated her so much. He asked how she was a saint and if she had any abilities. He spoke confidently about this with a sly smile. Noah broke a vase in front of the girl and said that it couldn't be that a little thing like her was his aunt. He smiled slyly, looking into the girl's eyes, and said that since she had entered the Elfanad family, she would have to prove that she was worthy of it. Leisha pressed herself to the floor and looked closely at the boy, her face becoming sad. She began to sweep up the broken vase and thought that she herself did not want to be adopted into such a family. The Duchy of Elfanad is a noble family that has survived the entire history of the empire and wields power second only to the imperial family. But what shocks her more is the fact that this guy always called her out for being a black magician from the slums. This Elfanad is the family of that obnoxious white mage Axel, who was her comrade during the expedition. White mages use the mana stored in their bodies for their magic, while black mages gather mana scattered throughout nature. That's the only difference. So why were they arguing then? Axel called her a black magician, trying to get everything for free without any effort. She called him a stupid white mage who couldn't cast spells when he ran out of mana. But thanks to this, they became very close. She could even call him her friend. But now that she'd been adopted into the Elfanad duchy, she was effectively his little sister. The girl began screaming that she didn't want this. She absolutely didn't want it. It's all because of a false prophecy given on Lesha's birthday. The boy holding the child said the little one was a saint because of one single prophecy. Eventually, the temple began searching for a family to sponsor the saint. The Duchy of Elfanad agreed to adopt her. However, when she failed to prove her powers as a saint, everyone soon turned their backs on her. In fact, she was treated almost like an abandoned vagabond. As if to ask how this orphan, without a drop of noble blood, dared to be adopted into such a noble ducal family. Moreover, Lesha has never yet demonstrated abilities unique to a saint. She is only indirectly the Duke's daughter, but no one in the duchy or the temple has any need of her. Even after regaining her memories of her past life, Lesha's timid nature remained, and tears flowed from her eyes on their own. The girl began wiping away her tears with her hands and trying to calm herself. When she asked herself to stop crying, she realized she was lisping. In any case, she can't just clean up a place like that. Perhaps she didn't kill the mad dragon properly. The faint, magical energy she felt before her death was definitely the power of the mad dragon. She needs to check everything properly. And given the restrictions, once will be enough. After all, if the remaining subscription period becomes 0 days, then it will die immediately. Meanwhile, the guy was sitting at the table, and in front of him was a piece of paper on which he was writing something. He suddenly looked up and remembered Graceline. His gaze was calm and very thoughtful at that moment. Noah told the woman he'd gone to take a quick look at what was going on, and she was acting up. Then, the woman asked if young Lady Lisha had really done it. The boy replied that yes, and she also said that they did not dare force the saint to clean up. This is what he told the Elfanad family's governess, Madame Jesper. He wanted the girl punished, or even expelled. The woman turned towards the door and told the boy that she would then go and take a look herself. Noah thought with a wry smile that this fake saint was probably not cleaning right now, but bawling her eyes out. If he was lucky, he might get her kicked out today. Jasper was already approaching the room where the girl was and opened the door, looking into the room. The boy was standing next to her and also looked closely into the room. The woman exclaimed in surprise that the room was very clean. Jasper asked young Master Noah if he'd mentioned young Lady Lisha making a mess in the pantry. The boy exclaimed that that simply couldn't be true. Lisha now smiled sarcastically and spoke about the power of magic, calling him a brat. Unlike the limited magic of white magicians, black magic is extremely practical. Moreover, since it uses external magical power, even a small child can handle it once they learn the principle. Lisha was very pleased with her actions and how she put this evil, harmful boy in his place. Jasper told young Master Noah that as punishment for lying, he would have to rewrite the etiquette book. The girl thought it was too early for him to try to fool the great sorceress. Suddenly, their gaze fell on the man who appeared on the threshold. He looked very serious and, crossing his arms over his chest, said he sensed magical energy. It was Duke Elfanad's second son, Axel Elfanad. Lisha was very surprised when she saw Axel in front of her, and beads of sweat began to run down her face. So many years have passed, and this stubborn face hasn't changed at all. The hero who defeated the Mad Dragon, the ruler of the Magic Tower, the exemplary white mage, and also a handsome man. Perhaps because this is their first meeting since Reincarnation, he seems unfamiliar to her. For starters, she should pretend she doesn't know him, because she'd rather die than call him Mr. Axel. Jasper asked the gentleman if something was wrong. He replied that a magical force had just been detected nearby. It wasn't dangerous, but he came to check everything. He didn't mean to say someone had used magic. Axel replied that that was exactly what he was saying. The girl turned out to be a criminal who had escaped with the help of black magic. The woman explained that only young Lady Lesha had been in the pantry the whole time. Perhaps there had been some mistake. Axel asked if she was really alone. Jasper replied that she was serving detention for skipping etiquette class without permission. The young lady was asked if she had seen anything. The girl began to frantically think about what to do. She had to pretend she knew nothing at all. Axel muttered that this couldn't be true. He clearly sensed the energy of black magic here. Jasper apologized to Mr. Axel and said that she knew he was overtired and had hardly slept since that day. But 5 years have passed. His Grace the Duke says nothing, but he is very worried about him. Axel replied that he would not admit anything until he saw irrefutable evidence with his own eyes. Jasper exclaimed that even though they were expedition comrades, the fact that Lady Graceline was a murderer who killed her student and escaped was undeniable. Leisha looked at those around her in horror and screamed without expecting it. Axel and Jasper immediately glanced at her. The girl immediately apologized, exclaiming that she urgently needed to go to the bathroom and turned to leave. Jasper immediately followed up by asking young Lady Leisha not to miss any more classes. Axel looked at the girl carefully, deep in thought. Lesia ran out of the room, sighing heavily as she tried to catch her breath from running so fast. It was hard for her to run on such short legs. She breathed with difficulty, leaning against the tree trunk. The girl got really angry while reading, so she gave up. But maybe she missed something at the end. And now she finally found it, about a fallen hero and the Black Mage of Despair, Graceline. But the girl couldn't understand why she was the fallen hero in the book. It said that the Black Mage of Despair had killed her apprentice, Hazen, and gone into hiding. On the day she set out for the final battle with the Mad Dragon, her apprentice Hazen was killed by a powerful curse. Curses are the quintessence of black magic. At the time, she was the only one using this black magic. Her sudden disappearance seems to have been the main reason for everything that has just happened and what is written about in the book. It looks like she actually ran away. In her eyes, he was always a lazy student. But Hazen was quite a powerful mage. Leisha thought that if Hazen had been defeated, then the enemy must have been quite strong. But who, then, was the real culprit? While the girl was reading this book, Axel suddenly approached her and asked if she was looking at anything interesting. The boy, peering into the book, remarked that it was a very difficult book for a 6-year-old girl. Lisa looked at Axel with alarm, realizing she hadn't sensed his presence at all. But perhaps this is for the best, because it was a good chance to talk to him alone. But what should she tell him? Tell him she wasn't a killer? That when she opened her eyes, she found herself reborn as a 6-year-old girl? And even if she told the truth, would he believe her? After all, history had written her down as a murderer. How to fix that so that people would believe her, she still didn't fully understand. And what if he doesn't believe her? And if this is the Axel she knows? But this is all nonsense, and Hazen isn't dead, and perhaps he'll believe her after all. The expedition needs to be reassembled. Could the Mad Dragon really still be alive? Axel lifted the girl above his head and looked deeply into her eyes. The book flew down, and the guy asked what the hay was in his brother's direction. The girl looked at him fearfully, worried about what would happen next. But the boy tried to talk to her calmly and sort everything out. For Graceline, a street orphan in her past life, the word brother came as a complete surprise, leaving her speechless. As if from another world, something she'd never spoken and didn't need. And that's the word she must say to her former comrade. Leisha exclaimed that she wouldn't do that for anything in the world. The girl exclaimed that some worthless white mage like him. Axel asked why she was saying like. The girl said she'd rather keep her mouth shut than call Axel brother. She cried out, clenching her fists, that she couldn't and wouldn't because she was Graceline. When Axel heard what the girl had just said, he immediately grabbed her in his arms and looked her intently in the eyes. He asked what she had just said and asked her to explain properly. Leisha thought that if he continued shaking her so hard, her head would start spinning. The boy thought, when the girl pretended that she probably lost consciousness and asked her to come to her senses. A little boy sat on the floor in a white shirt, and around him were various cult symbols. This boy was very pathetic, and the girl could not understand who he was. She understood only one thing, that he was suffering greatly. Then the boy looked up at Lesia and asked her for help. When the girl opened her eyes, she realized with horror that it had all been a dream. She started looking around and couldn't figure out where she was. The room was bright and beautiful. Lesia turned her head towards Axel, who was sitting next to her crib on a chair and looking at her intently. Axel said he was a little scared when she suddenly fainted. They'd had a very important conversation before that. Lesia began to remember and realized that she had been screaming as if she couldn't and didn't want to. That meant she must have lost consciousness after that. Axel immediately approached the girl and handed her a glass of water. He asked her to drink it and that she would feel better. Lesia decided he probably believed her words, so she decided to wet her throat first and took a sip of water. Axel heard that his father adopted a saint from the temple. But what a disappointment, because she certainly looks so. Lesia, after drinking a glass of water, exclaimed with a smile that she now seemed to have come to life, and the boy said that he would now get to the main point. Axel looked at the girl carefully and seriously asked what proof she had that she really was Graceline. He continued to say that he was a magician and did not worship the gods. But if the voice of a god had told the truth about this important event, the story would have been slightly different. The girl listened attentively and exclaimed that she, too, didn't believe in gods. She explained that she hadn't heard any voices. Then he continued to inquire and asked if she had not heard the voice of God, since she was a saint. Lesia told the boy that she wasn't a saint. She was Graceline. Before she could finish, Axel slammed his fist on the table, knocking over a glass of water. The man said that this was not a name that she could pronounce as she pleased. His gaze was very stern and serious, so much so that goosebumps ran across the girl's skin and she, covered in beads of sweat, thought about it. Lesia asked what was wrong with her using her own name. The girl called him a stupid white mage. When she said this phrase, Axel's face changed and became even more serious and thoughtful. Lesia smiled and thought, continuing to look at Axel, that when she was Graceline, she always called him that. She also called him a charlatan, a priest, and a bandit. The girl pointed her finger at Axel and called him a spirit whisperer who sleeps in his socks. She also continued to scream and say that the prince snored terribly in his sleep. And the white mage definitely had athlete's foot. Axel was simply shocked when he heard the girl's word and exclaimed that it was nonsense. Lesia smiled sarcastically and, laughing a little, said that it wasn't nonsense. She'd seen him wear toe socks. Facts that only the expedition members could know. One of the boys asked how much they'd managed to loot today for blessings. The second, smiling, replied that they'd received about 100 gold coins. Axel was simply shocked and still can't understand how she knows all this. Horrified, he asked the girl who she even was. When he called her Lesia, the girl exclaimed that she was Graceline. She held her hand out in front of her, and a bright purple ball began to swirl in it. She continued to hold it in her hand, showing it to Axel. But this simply can't be true, and it's clearly a dream or an illusion. For such a little girl to be Graceline, it simply couldn't be. But this magical power definitely resembled her. Axel asked again if she really was Graceline. The girl replied that it was true, and that she had been reborn. But before she could finish speaking, Axel immediately hugged her and held her close. With tears in his eyes, he told the girl that he had been looking for her for a long time. When Lesia began to argue with him, he exclaimed that her character was still the same. In any case, he was very happy to see her again, and the man called her by name. He took the girl's hand and shook it, smiling. Lesia thought that the reunion with her old friend was warmer than she had thought or expected. Suddenly, the girl smiled and exclaimed that she, too, was very happy to see him. So much so that she completely forgot about the enormous changes that were about to happen. She talked to Axel about what had happened while she was away. They talked constantly about everything that had happened, about how she signed a strange scroll sent by the Spirit Lord, about how she doubted the Mad Dragon's death and went to the site of the final battle. She also talked about how she'd fallen under the influence of an unknown force and died. Axel asked the girl why she'd suddenly used black magic yesterday. Lesia explained that she'd been too lazy to clean up and had also had a very strange dream. The girl asked if he knew a guy who looked very sad. The boy was about her age and had dark hair and green eyes. He was locked up somewhere and asking for help. Axel replied that he didn't know anyone like that, but he wondered why she was suddenly asking about it. The girl asked him to forget it and thought that maybe it was just a silly dream. Axel closed his eyes and, crossing his arms over his chest, told the girl that things had become a little complicated. She asked what exactly he meant. Axel explained that, firstly, Graceline, as she had already realized, was considered a murderer. The Imperial family is still looking for her. The girl looked at the wanted poster for the Black Mage of Despair, Graceline. When the girl asked in surprise if she was wanted, Axel replied that she knew that black magic was not viewed very well anyway. Besides, her student was found dead, and she disappeared completely. The witch used her dark magic, and everyone understood everything. Rumors spread with renewed, incredible speed. Leisha exclaimed that she would never do such a thing. That's precisely why misunderstandings arise. She was very upset, but there was nothing she could do about it. Axel explained that this was precisely why using black magic was prohibited for now. When the girl asked why, the boy explained that he had already said that the Imperial family was looking for her. If she continues to use black magic as recklessly as she did today, she will be executed. The girl was very scared, and Axel explained that she was lucky that she was next to him. Otherwise, she would have been grabbed already. Licia exclaimed, "That can't be your question." Axel said he would find a way to save her, but she had to be patient for now. The girl was very upset because she was considered the killer. Axel explained that he knew it wasn't her. Leisha told Axel that he was a cunning black magician, so for him to do something like this secretly was really nothing. The boy extended his hand to the girl's forehead and said that he could not even imagine that she had died. The girl asked him to stop chatting, and he said that this also applies to those guys. She remembered and exclaimed that the mad dragon could rise again and that the team needed to be reassembled. Axel replied that, unfortunately, it was impossible to gather all three of them right now. They were quite capable before, and after defeating the mad dragon, they became such celebrities. Kirky became especially famous. When the boy touched the girl's cheeks, he thought they were very soft. Leisha thought that everyone except her was truly popular. Axel asked the girl if it would be scary if he met them first. Kirky, who was the crown prince during the time of the detachment, inherited the throne at the emperor's promise and became emperor. If the current Emperor Kirk ignored the accusations of murder against her, he must have had his reasons. In any case, the most important thing now is to find the criminal who abandoned her like that. Imagine, they adopted such a beggar into the Elfanad ducal family, hoping she would be a saint. And in the end, they were deceived. But that's completely unthinkable. Axel asked the girl if she would go with him, and when she asked where, he replied that he was going to wash with his brother. Leisha asked in response why it should wash with him. Axel explained that it was because she was a child, and her brother wanted to wash her, which was wrong. Legally, she's his younger sister. The girl exclaimed that he was a stupid, perverted white mage and asked him to let her go. Meanwhile, the girl was already sitting in the huge bathtub, and the maids were around her, washing her. One of them exclaimed with a smile, asking the young lady if the water temperature was right. It was Lesha's personal maid, Lily. Another of Leisha's personal maids, Rose, asked her if she liked the scent of bath salts. Leisha's third personal maid, Daisy, told the girl that if she was in pain, she should tell them about it right away. The girl smiled and said that everything was fine. She was very unaccustomed to this situation. She silently called Axel a bastard, because if this was how they washed themselves, he should have warned her about it beforehand. From now on, her personal maids would be serving her. They talked about how they would take good care of the girl, and now she was all washed and in beautiful clothes. One of the maids exclaimed that the young mistress was very beautiful. Another said that the dress hadn't been custom made, and that was a shame. A third said that it must have been very uncomfortable for her to wear clothes that didn't fit all this time. Licia replied with a smile that everything was fine. She thought everyone dressed like that. Besides, these clothes were much nicer than they had been in her previous life. So for Axel, this kind of life was par for the course. The girl looked closely at herself in the mirror, lost in thought. The boy then told her to buy herself at least some other clothes, to which the girl replied that it was none of his business. One of the maids remarked that it was very strange. The Duke had allocated such a large budget to ensure she was well looked after. The second one wondered what Hannah had been doing all this time. Hannah is her former maid. She was indifferent, but never harmed her. The maid sometimes even forgot to bring her dinner, but she was kind and harmless. When they saw the girl's gaze, they immediately rushed to prepare food for her. They asked the young lady to wait a little. When they left, Lesha thought she wanted a break from them. It had been such a frantic hustle and bustle, and now she could at least live a little. Could it really be that the dreary room she had lived in since she was adopted looked like this? But now she had completely changed in the blink of an eye, just by Axel's command. The girl began to fall asleep, and with her eyes closed, she thought, pressing her fist to her chest, that the room in which she lived before was also not bad. The blanket smelled very pleasant, and she continued to lie there and think about it. Suddenly, the door swung open and a boy appeared on the threshold, asking what kind of trick she was playing here. Leisha thought about how she was just about to get some rest. Noah mentioned how the warehouse was a complete mess, how he'd had to rewrite the etiquette book 10 times because of her, and whether she knew how much his arm hurt. He approached the girl and asked her to quickly explain what she was doing. Lesha thought about how noisy it was here and wondered if something could be done about this child. Suddenly, the system announced a quest notification for the saint alone, for which she could receive coins. Noah wondered where she was looking and whether she couldn't hear him. The system indicated that I had 3 months left to live and needed to renew my subscription with Paradise Coins. Leisha realized that to continue living, she needed to pay in coins. The girl again began to peer intently at the monitor. She doesn't sense any magic, so how does it all work? The goal was to shed Noah Elfanad's tears. Well, that boy's tears are a very tempting goal. The boy approached the girl and asked if she was really going to pretend to be mute now, and that was really low. Lesha thought that if she could, she would teach him a lesson with black magic, but she immediately remembered Axel, who looked menacingly into her eyes and said that in this case, she would be executed. What a pity this was, the girl thought. Noah looked at her and asked what she had just said. The girl decided that if magic couldn't be used, then the only option was a physical attack, and she ran up to him to strike. Leisha thought about how she hadn't liked this from the start. A little boy stood next to a man who was stroking his head. A man appeared on the threshold and addressed his lordship, the Duke of Elfanad. One day she appeared unannounced and took everything from him. The man handed over the child and asked her to take care of Saint Leisha. That was the turning point in the boy's life. He hated this girl. At that moment, he was lying on the floor after she beat him up. Neo couldn't understand why he was lying on the floor. Had she really just hit him? And this brat who uses violence still calls herself a saint? He would never admit it in his life. The boy asked how dare she headbutt him. Neo began wiping tears from his eyes and told the girl that she would see more of him. He wouldn't let this go. The system informed the girl that her quest had been completed and congratulated her on receiving a reward of 50,000 Paradise Coins. She thought that if she continued to receive coins, she wouldn't have to worry about her life expectancy. Neo asked why she was laughing and if she was crazy. He promised to tell everyone about it, and if she even knew how scary his dad was. He had already said he wouldn't let it go. The system asked the girl if she wanted to receive the coins immediately, and then the reward would be paid. A gold coin appeared in the boy's hands, which surprised him greatly, and he asked where it had fallen from. Leisha was very happy because gold coins started to rain down on her. This was the very thing she'd only heard about, a monetary punishment, and it was simply magnificent. The boy was already in that pile of gold coins, begging to be saved. The girl came closer to him and asked if he was okay. She realized that he was most likely unconscious. She decided she needed to get it out first and started tugging at his hand. She herself hadn't expected the coins to rain down so suddenly. Meanwhile, Axel peeked into the girl's room and asked why she was in such disarray. Lesia thought he'd arrived just in time. He looked in surprise at the mountain of gold coins. Leisha explained that they were coins from heaven. They had started pouring out as soon as she completed the quest. Axel picked up one of them and saw a sacred seal. He said it was a divine design that humans could not counterfeit. It seemed this really was a currency created by God. Lesia asked the boy if this meant they could be trusted. How could they possibly handle such a quantity? Axel asked her not to worry about it. A piggy bank in the shape of a small, magical piggy bank appeared before the girl. The magical piggy bank can store a huge number of items. Licia looked at the piggy bank in surprise, and the coins began to fly into the hole that was on its back. She was very happy because all these coins disappeared in the blink of an eye, and the girl hugged and pressed the piggy bank to herself. She immediately approached the pig and thanked him for it, calling him very sweet. But she was surprised when he suddenly disappeared. Axel explained to the girl that when she needed him, she could call him and he would come to her. In any case, the gold coins were engraved with a sacred seal, and so he would send a letter to Baal. Perhaps he knew something about the power of the saint, and Lesha replied that she was counting on him. Neo asked who she was and why she was pulling these tricks again. Axel shot the boy a very stern look. He asked him what Neo was doing in Lesia's room. The girl thought that, of course, he had come to torment her. Neo exclaimed with a smile that he had come to greet his aunt. Axel replied that if that was true, then let him do so. The boy no longer knew how to get out of it and froze in place when Axel said this phrase. But the boy continued to look him in the eyes and ask him to greet Lessa right now, looking at him with a grin. He asked her to do it very politely and courteously. Neo clenched his fists and thought about how difficult it would be to greet this brat. Licia hid behind Axel's leg, peeking out from behind it. The boy bowed before her and asked permission to greet her. After all, he is just a child who cannot disobey adults. It was very difficult for the boy to do this, but he still bowed before the girl and made the right choice, especially when Axel looked at him very sternly. His gaze was unyielding. Neo walked up to the girl, and when he lowered his head down, he squeezed his, but did it. Licia peeked out from behind Axel's leg and looked at the boy carefully, surprised. That was just before her, the composure of an adult. Lesha also approached the boy and bowed before him. Then she looked at him, at his surprised gaze. Axel glanced at the boy again and said that if he'd done it, he could go. Neo immediately obeyed, turned, and headed for the door. Axel and Lesia stood in the middle of the room, waiting with satisfied faces for this naughty boy to leave. Axel said that this boy has his own reasons for behaving this way, so he asks Lesia to understand him correctly. But if he bothers her again, let her tell him. Lesia exclaimed that Axel's strength wasn't bad. The boy asked what kind of strength. The girl replied that it didn't matter, and he leaned over her and asked if she'd used magic again. It always caused problems. Licia replied that she hadn't, and it was all because of the quest. Axel didn't understand what she was talking about and asked what kind of quest it was. Licia, when he was waiting for an answer, turned to the side and laughed and said that it was a secret. One way or another, she now has reliable support and will fully enjoy the life of a noble lady. Every day, beautiful dresses and sparkling jewelry that were bought and given to her. Sumptuous feasts at every meal, sweet desserts she would try for the first time in her life. The maids offered her a wide variety of desserts and care throughout the day. They asked the young lady from various directions if she needed anything. Lessa exclaimed that the life of an aristocrat was the best. She thought to herself that, by the way, the pig's belly was full of heavenly coins. Kryusha climbed onto the girl, who immediately hugged her. A message from heaven arrived, along with instructions. So, with these heavenly coins, she could pay for a reincarnation subscription and also make wishes. Helping with tasks probably means helping with quests, but the most compelling reward is paying for a reincarnation subscription. With the coins she had, she could extend her life by a full 5 months. She remembered Baal, who was obsessed with money. She asked him to lend her her book, and he asked for rent in return. To pay for the subscription, she had to go to the temple first, so she decided to put it off for now. Licia went into the heavenly store and saw the merchandise, but it was limited time. She can't resist limited editions. The girl immediately pressed the enter button, and the spring sale in the heavenly store opened before her. Just looking at the merchandise increases her sense of holiness, so the girl decided to take a look as soon as possible. But she wondered why everything was so expensive. 1 life code cost 1 item. To buy it, she'd have to spend the annual subscription fee. She saw the limited edition and even at a discount and exclaimed, "It's so easy!" Does that really mean she'll be exchanging exactly 5 months of her life? When Leisha looked at all this, she decided, turning around, that she would not buy it. The system told her that if she missed out on it now, she'd deeply regret it. A pesky pop-up window appeared, and she again said she wouldn't buy it. It was a limited-time offer with a 100% discount. The quest log is a practical book that records various assignments from the gods in real time, which can be used to earn paradise coins. The girl was delighted that it was free. She received a notification that she had purchased a quest journal. Leisha closed the journal and decided to see if it was him in front of her. Was this really how completed quests were marked? The girl understood what it meant. Each quest had its own god who commissioned it. The god of justice, the goddess of love, the god of luck. She continued to flip through the book and read about the hidden reward and became curious about what effect it had. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a quest, but the maids interrupted her and told the young mistress it was time for dinner. From now on, the young mistress's meals are very important, and they will not miss them for anything. Today's dinner menu is the most tender roast suckling pig. The girl exclaimed, swallowing her drool, that it looked delicious. She wished herself bon appetit and began tucking into the young piglet. As expected, the life of an aristocrat is the best. The maid asked the young lady if she had liked today's dinner. The Duchy of Elfanad is made up entirely of young gentlemen, so they are overjoyed to serve the young lady. But why did Master Axel suddenly become so concerned about the young lady's life? One of the maids replied that Cardinal Bale had officially recognized her as a saint. Naturally, he would be concerned about the child entrusted to him by a close friend. But despite this, he showed no interest in me for the last few years. Another maid asked him to stop and not say such things in front of the young mistress. The girl thought about something she found very interesting. They probably said this thinking she wouldn't understand. When the young lady was told everything was ready, she looked in the mirror and was very surprised. The girl was wearing a pretty dress and a bow on her head. She was holding a soft teddy bear and exclaimed how much she loved it and thanked him for it. The maids were delighted and said she was very sweet and couldn't possibly be an angel. Another maid remarked that she was so kind and that such rumors were circulating about her. Another said she was sure it was Hannah who was spreading such rumors. They asked her to speak more quietly so the young lady wouldn't hear. Leisha thought that it seemed like Hannah had been spreading strange rumors about her. At this point, she wondered what was wrong with Hannah. The maids told the young mistress that everything was fine, nothing had happened, and that they would serve her with all their might. From now on, she will wear only good clothes and eat lots of delicious things. Just let her tell them and trust them, and they will do everything. The girl saw favorable glances and undeserved kindness before her. To be honest, she wasn't used to it yet, because in her past life, she always had to cope completely alone. But she's no longer Graceline, so she must get used to life as Leisha Elfanad. The maid asked if she had anything to say as she approached the girl. Leisha came closer to her and whispered in her ear that she would like to meet someone. When the maid heard who she wanted to meet, she was very surprised, and beads of sweat began to run down her cheeks. Hannah said at the time that Lady Lesha had thrown a vase at her. And yet, after all the other maids had quit, she was the only one caring for her. After all, one can't hide one's lowly origins, and such a young lady, and she already has a strong character. Suddenly, a man in armor addressed her. Hannah immediately turned her head in his direction, wondering what had happened. The man informed her that the Duke had ordered her to be placed in solitary confinement, and now this maid was already behind bars and screaming in horror, asking why she was there. Meanwhile, the young mistress's maid had already approached her and asked if the shoes she'd brought fit. Lesia looked at her and replied that they did, and everything was fine. Then they decided to enter and approach the door. The man she had requested a meeting with sat at a table with a notepad in his hands. The maid brought the young lady to the Duke. It was the head of the Elfanad family, the Duke. He looked up at the girl and asked if she had any business with him. He was Duke Elfanad, a former swordmaster and a cold-blooded pedant. He's a boar, nicknamed the Demon Duke. For the first time in her life, she saw such incredible beauty and realized where Axel got his beautiful face from. The Duke glanced at the girl and asked what she wanted to say. This was the man she needed to make the best impression on in the duchy. First impressions are important, so be polite. Lesia bowed unexpectedly to the Duke when greeting him. She did it very abruptly and realized she had screwed up badly. But this was only in her thoughts, and she greeted the Duke again. The girl said with all the politeness of a playful woman that it was an honor to meet him. She greeted him gracefully in a similar manner. Lesia decided to get straight to the point and said she had come with a request. The Duke was surprised and asked the little lady what she wanted. The girl asked permission to enter the prison cell. Then the Duke asked why she needed to go to such a place, and whether it was because of Hannah. Lesia smiled and exclaimed that it was all true. The girl wanted to explain to him why, but she was a little scared and stuttered at that moment, stopping. She was simply shocked and could not understand where these hiccups started from and whether the Duke was angry. She begged the hiccups to stop, calling the little body very timid. Lesia didn't expect it when the man picked her up. He raised her to eye level and thought about how much she liked it. What a strange situation, and was this really déjà vu? Lesia realized he was angry about something else. The Duke angrily asked who dared to put such shoes on a member of the Elfanad family. The maid, horrified, immediately replied that she had taken the measurements and sent them to the tailor. But she was told that due to the large number of orders, production would take time. So she rushed to find ready-made ones and apologizes for that. Lesia wondered if the shoes were really a reason to be so angry. In the slums, even such shoes would be welcome. The Duke asked the maid to stop making excuses and said that solitary confinement awaited her too. The girl immediately told the Duke that everything was fine. She clasped her hands and apologized for choosing the shoes, asking him not to scold Lily. The girl thought that if the maid ended up in solitary confinement, it would be very bad. The Duke said that everything was fine and he forgave her. But this insolent girl should have been sent not to solitary confinement, but straight to hell. The girl screamed, terrified that the death penalty awaited her, and shouted that Hannah couldn't be sent to hell. She had to meet her at all costs. The Duke asked what she planned to do once she met Hannah. Lesia knew this would happen and had prepared her answer in advance. She was her servant, so as her mistress, she would punish her. The girl exclaimed that she needed to earn 30,000 coins. The Duke could not understand what she meant and asked if she did not have enough money. Lesia realized she hadn't meant it. She began to worry deeply and couldn't figure out how to fix everything, as it was getting worse and worse. The Duke gave orders to allow her to do whatever she wanted and said that he would be there to see to the punishment of the maid. For some reason, the Duke asked the maids to trust Lesia. This was also a surprise for her, the Duke said, turning to the man who appeared on the threshold, that he did not know that he had a hobby of eavesdropping on conversations. The boy replied that the door was ajar, and since he'd heard it, he decided to intervene as her older brother. The Duke allowed him in, and the girl thought Axel had arrived just in time. He told the Duke that he would escort the girl to the punishment cell, asking her to wait in the room. Lesia immediately thanked him for his help. Axel told Lesia that there was no rush, and that she needed to gradually practice saying the words dad and brother. Lesia thought that for her, a person who had no family in her past life, these were very unusual words. Axel asked the girl why she wanted to meet that crazy maid. He helped because he thought she had some kind of plan. Lesia, clenching her fists again, explained to the Duke that she needed to earn coins. The man asked why she needed those coins. The girl explained to the Duke that without them, she would simply die. He became curious about what she meant and why she said it. Lesia immediately put her finger to her mouth and asked if that was what she was talking about. The man thought, in horror, and I looked at the girl, that she was most likely terminally ill, and that's why she was talking about it. They'd just met, and she was saying she'd soon die again. The girl exclaimed, "That's true, but there's a way out if she collects the coins." The boy wondered why she would die and why Graceline again. If she died again, he would no longer be able to find her, and if she disappeared like that, he would neither be able to find nor see her. Due to his unstable mental state, his magic is getting out of control, and she began to worry about Axel. Lesia exclaimed, looking at the boy, that she wouldn't die, trying to calm him down. After he asked, she quickly explained everything to him. Axel asked in response whether collecting and using these heavenly coins could actually prolong life. The restoration was complete, including the mental one. Leisha explained to the boy that she therefore needed to go and complete quests with Hannah. The coins needed to be donated to the temple. Axel said that it would take forever for her to receive the donation. He grabbed her and lifted her up. The boy exclaimed, trying to get the girl to the punishment cell as quickly as possible, that she could have said about this earlier. Hannah was already kneeling before Axel and telling the young master that she was guilty and had committed a mortal sin. The news of her father's deteriorating health seemed to momentarily disabuse her. Leisha seemed to momentarily disabuse herself. Axel said it meant she was stealing Leisha's entire budget for her father's medications. If this was true, he felt very sorry for her. Hannah exclaimed that everything was true and her situation was very grave. She again asked for mercy. However, there was one fact she had overlooked. Axel approached the maid and asked if she thought he would have sent her to solitary confinement without checking everything. What nonsense about a sick father who died several years ago. Until the very end, she thinks the Elfanad family are idiots. It's a pathetic excuse just to get out of the situation. Hannah knelt again, this time before her mistress. She exclaimed that she had been wrong and again asked for forgiveness. Leza thought she had changed her mind very quickly. Hannah knelt before her and told her that she was a saint, continuing to call her young lady. Saints are magnanimous after all, and she should forgive her. The maid continued to beg for forgiveness and said that she had served her sincerely all this time. According to the girl's recollections, the maid told the young mistress that bathing in cold water was good for her health. But she asked in surprise how she could be cold if she had divine protection. When Hannah was hungry, she asked why she had to eat so regularly, and was it okay if she skipped another meal? Hannah thought about how the old Leisha wouldn't have dared object to hearing this. But why was she such a saint? And now everything was so different. The system had tasked the impudent servant with severe retribution, and she must reveal to the world the greatness of a saint. Lesia considered whether to forgive her or punish her. It was all in her hands. Axel told the maid that this was all ridiculous and asked what Lesia was going to do. The maid continued to beg the girl to forgive her and call her a saint incessantly. But it still wasn't enough, and she began to scream louder and beg for forgiveness. Leisha continued to consider whether to use forgiveness or punishment in this situation. But she was a saint, so she chose forgiveness. The girl clenched her fists and exclaimed that if she remembered everything, then she did that punishment. That's it. Leisha was already standing in front of the monitor, clicking on the screen while looking at it. Was the reward amount really changing already? Give the maid a chance to correct her mistake, for which she will be rewarded. If she forgives her mistake, she will be given 2,000 more. So the girl decided to choose forgiveness after all. They raised the amount as if they were competing, and wonder if the gods are watching her in real time. When Axel approached Leisha, he was very surprised and asked what she was so worried about. The girl was angry that her plan to punish the maid had failed. She told Axel that she had 2 quests and she didn't know which one to choose. He couldn't understand what she was talking about and simply advised her to complete both quests at once. The girl immediately considered his words. And indeed, nowhere did it say that she had to choose just one. So he gave her an idea that finally pleased her. She looked closely at the maid and, pointing her finger at her, called her by name. Suddenly, she exclaimed that she forgave her. She explained to Hannah that she could pay for her mistake with her life. She'll find her a new job, let her work hard there, and return the stolen money. Hannah replied to the saint that, as expected, she was very merciful. However, the new job is a mine in the barren lands of the northern continent, and to pay off the debt, she will have to work as a slave for 30 years. Hannah was very upset and could not understand how the head maid could work in the mine for so many years, and this simply could not be true. After everything that happened, Leisha was holding a book in her hands, and there was a boy next to her. The girl told Axel that she had completed both tasks as he had instructed. Lesia opened the book and told the boy that she would now find the next operation. He looked at her questioningly, and the girl explained that in order to prolong her life for a long time, 230,000 coins were needed, and that was a drop in the ocean. The girl smiled and asked the boy if he too wanted her to live a long life. Axel, lowering his head, answered that of course he did. Leisha, without letting go of the book, exclaimed that she would complete this quest next. No matter how much you show him, he still can't see anything. So only she can see the book's contents. Axel asked again what the quest was. The girl explained that they needed to find a 4-leaf clover. In her past life, having defeated a mad dragon, she built a house in a secluded place in the north. She spent her days there studying new dark magic. The villagers wondered what kind of magic she was learning. She asked Hezin to watch something, showing him something. Her student watched intently, and the girl spoke of having learned magic that unties knots. Hezin was very surprised and asked the teacher if she had really been studying this magic for a whole month. The girl explained that this wasn't just any magic, it was very, very useful. Thanks to it, she could always untie any knot with ease. With its help, she became one step closer to old age, which is when she won't have to do all sorts of tedious household chores. Incidentally, her research included magic that turns weeds into 4-leaf clovers. Axel asked why she suddenly locked herself away in the village to study such things. The girl replied that it was a repeatable quest, so she'd definitely be able to earn a ton of coins. Axel became curious about how to turn weeds into 4-leaf clovers. He asked Lesha where the weeds were, and then she began to wonder if they were growing everywhere. Before she could finish speaking, the boy exclaimed that this was all complete nonsense. He glared at the girl and explained that this was the Duke of Elfanad's estate. 5 gardeners, along with numerous servants, tended the garden every day without a break. Does she think weeds have time to grow? The boy was very angry, and she began to sweat. The girl fell to the floor, clinging to it with her hands, and exclaimed that she was very much mistaken. Apparently, weeds need to be grown first. The boy asked if a 3-leaf clover would work, to which the girl replied that a 4-leaf clover was needed. Then he said that nothing could be done and asked to wait a day, and then he would arrange everything. Axel sat the girl down on the grass and, smiling, asked if she trusted her brother. Licia looked at him carefully and thought that she was going to throw up. And so the next day arrived. The clearing was full of 4-leaf clovers, and the girl couldn't understand how they had grown in just one night. Licia was just shocked and told Axel that it was absolutely amazing. She was very surprised and asked how many there were, then began counting. Lesia said there were a lot of them. The system indicated that the quest would be completed when it collected and distributed the 4-leaf clover. The girl said that she would share her luck with Axel and decided to hand them all out at once. She continued running across the field, collecting clover and handing it out to Axel. A mountain of coins rained down on her. Could this really be the future Lesha imagined in her wild fantasies? But when nothing worked for her, Lesia realized that it seemed they needed to be distributed to different people and not just one. She asked the boy how many servants there were in the mansion. Axel, thoughtfully, replied that there were definitely more than 100. The girl thought about the number of servants and wondered what would happen if she gave each one. She counted and realized that it would be 10,000 coins, which meant 1 month of her life, and exclaimed that this was very cool and she would go and distribute it. Axel, looking at the girl, thought that it was not in vain that he had created them with the help of magic all night. When the maids heard that the girl was giving everyone her luck, they also wanted and eagerly awaited a 4-leaf clover. The girl continued to distribute and wish everyone good luck, scattering the leaves with a smile on her lips and her eloquence. She approached every servant in the palace and wished the saint good luck. She asked the women to take as much as possible from the girls. She had a lot of fun when she received coins that saved her life. Thanks to this, she no longer has to worry about coins. Licia continued handing out 4-leaf clovers, wishing everyone as much luck as possible. She excitedly approached the man standing before her and, with her eyes closed, handed him a piece of paper as well. The Duke inquired what was going on. One of the maids explained that young Mistress Lesia had created a flower bed of 4-leaf clovers and decided that she shouldn't have to eat them alone. So she was distributing 4-leaf clovers to everyone in the mansion. The man asked the girl how she had created the flower bed. One of the maids explained to the Duke that, as far as she knew, Master Axel had helped her. The Duke was very surprised and said with a thoughtful look that she had become closer to him. Licia wondered if he was angry because she'd grown the flower bed without permission, or perhaps because she'd caused a ruckus handing out the clover. The girl decided that whether she died now or later didn't matter at all, but she had to complete this quest. Then she took a 4-leaf clover from her basket and handed it to the Duke for good luck. She said with a smile that she would give him the biggest one. She thought to herself that she would first get rid of the rest and then get a scolding. First he'll give it to her, and then he'll beg for forgiveness. The Duke asked if she wanted to give it to him. The girl thought she should have apologized first, and she almost fell into the Duke's disfavor. She had also accumulated quite a few sacred coins. When the girl was already tired of these distributions of 4-leaf clovers, she decided that it was time to slowly go to the temple. The guy who was in the room next to the Duke noticed that he also received a 4-leaf clover from the saint. The man explained that he had also received a pair and, laughing, asked if he thought this clover really brought good luck. Suddenly, the angrily Duke asked the man to give him the clover, and he was very surprised. He asked who had given him permission to accept gifts from his daughter. The man thought that, whatever one might say, he was very sensitive to matters concerning children. He would need to collect the ones the servants had received too. The Duke asked the old man if he was referring to the letter arriving from the central temple. The man replied that it had indeed arrived from Kadesh. He began to hand the Duke the glued letter and explained that the sender was Cardinal Kaltus. The Duke, with a thoughtful look, unfolded the letter, where it was written that they demanded the return of the saint, who would soon be 7 years old. The man exclaimed that they were simply hypocrites. They had sent her away, calling her a saint, and now they were making such impudent demands. The Duke gave orders to refuse them immediately. Besides, there were more important matters. He asked if preparations for that day were proceeding as planned. Meanwhile, a 2-horse carriage was driving down the road, with Lesia and Axel inside. The girl was calling the piggy bank "cutie." The boy asked her what she was so happy about. The girl explained that she had already collected many sacred coins. If she donated them all, she could live for a full 28 months. He then asked why he was so pessimistic. Axel replied that she was terminally ill anyway and had less than 3 years to live. Lesia said it was much shorter initially. She'll gradually increase the time limit, so she asks him not to worry. Axel was still very worried and said, crossing his arms over his chest, that her habit of thinking that everything would work out somehow never changed. The girl asked him if he was interested. After all, what if, even after dying, she could be reborn again? After the boy pulled the girl by the hair, she cried out, clutching her head, that it was very painful. Axel looked at the girl seriously and asked her not to speak so lightly of death. She immediately apologized to him and thought that he could make that face too. The man met Mr. Axel and greeted him as the head of the magic tower. He said they were glad to see him at the temple. The boys wished for God's blessing to come with them and bowed before him. Lesia thought about how she had come to this temple for a blessing before leaving for war. This was her first visit since her rebirth. Although she was a saint recognized by the church, she had little contact with the temple. She may have been adopted, but it was the temple that left her in the care of the Elfanades. Shouldn't the people from the temple at least be somewhat interested in how she's doing? The guy approached the boys and asked what brought them to this temple. He smiled and asked if the head of the magic tower had finally decided to start serving God. Axel told the high priest that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He asked them not to worry and said he hadn't come to start a fight. The high priest asked what he was talking about. What kind of quarrel was he talking about? He hadn't even thought about it. The god welcomes any visitor. However, the temple is closed to the public today, so he can't let them in. They turn away all visitors. Then Axel asked if this really meant anything, even if it concerned the saint and was her request. The high priest immediately asked what he was saying and glanced at the girl. Lesia peeked out from behind the boy's leg and, after greeting him, explained that she was Saint Lesia. The girl laughed to herself and thought that this time she had greeted him properly. The high priest laughed and said that if it was Lady Lesia, that would be a different matter. He thought to himself that she was a false saint who couldn't even manifest her divine powers. Because Cardinal Bale misinterpreted the prophecy, rumors began to circulate that the wrong child had been declared a saint. The saint will soon turn 7 years old, and if she still does not learn to use her divine power, Cardinal Bale will be brought to the Holy Court. The girl couldn't understand why now. She said she had received a message from heaven and had come to make a donation to the temple. The high priest thought that the saint, who was unable to use divine power, was now suddenly speaking of divine revelation. This was a perfect opportunity to overthrow Cardinal Bael. Axel wondered if the head of the magic tower, who was close to Cardinal Bael, was in cahoots with him and they were up to something. The high priest chuckled and said that for a revelation, that was rather modest. He asked if there was any proof that the heavens had sent such a message. Axel was surprised that he was asking for proof and asked if the saint's revelation needed proof. When God sends a revelation, he always leaves a sign, and if it's a lie, he reveals it. Looking at the man, Lesha said that there was proof. She had a piggy bank with heavenly coins in her hands, and taking out one, she exclaimed that it was a sacred coin. The high priest thought that if she had a coin with a divine sign, it meant the little one was hoping for good luck. He remarked that one such coin wasn't enough proof. Then the girl said there could be more. Then he looked at the girl in surprise, and she thought, putting her hand forward, that in fact she had not yet received the reward that she had earned then. They want to get rid of Noah completely. 50,000 coins would be enough. But what if they used the 230,000 coins she received as a reward? I wonder how full the temple will be. While she was thinking about this, 2 young men were standing outside the gates, guarding the high priest. When they heard the noise, they opened the door and, startled, asked the high priest what had happened. Were golden coins bearing a divine sign really falling from the sky? One of the boys exclaimed that it was a divine revelation. Axel, surprised, said that such a quantity should be enough as convincing evidence. Licia thought that flaunting money was simply wonderful. After the piggy bank stopped giving out coins, the piggy bank fell onto its back and began to catch its breath. One of the boys told the saint to ignore them and use the altar as she pleased. They would take care of the high priest themselves, and the girl thanked them. She asked Axel if they would make a donation. She was curious about what the boys saw. The system issued the sacred coin donation and the donation procedure. Licia held the piglet in her arms and told him to lay out all the coins. She asked to simply lay them out here on the altar, and when the pig did it, she thought that it was just great and the coins were in place. She had never prayed before, but she thought that she could just roughly repeat after Baal and immediately stood in front of the altar. Axel watched the girl carefully, crossing his legs and looking at her intently. The girl continued to pray and asked the Lord if he could hear her. Since she has been reborn, she will try to live on the right path, but it would be great if God gave a discount on the subscription. Otherwise, it's a bit offensive. Not that she was bragging, but in her past life, she saved the world by defeating a mad dragon. If she hadn't defeated it, the world would have been destroyed by now. She still wanted to say so much, but what was that on the screen in front of her now? Was that a reward for her donation? And had the giveaway been activated? The effect will be triggered under certain conditions. Just think, she could receive such a reward simply for a sacrifice. Axel asked if it was over and if her life had been extended. Licia told the boy that his life had been extended and asked him not to worry. Axel said that in that case they could go back, but the girl asked him to wait a little. She had some kind of intuitive premonition, and her intuition suddenly glowed a bright lilac color. An intuitive premonition led her, rather, in the direction where a road strewn with flowers awaited her. The girl asked the boy to go ahead. He didn't have time to ask her to wait before she started running away from him. Lesha ran very quickly in the direction of her premonition. Could this really be intuition? And her heart is pounding so hard? It was said that if she goes there, a road strewn with flowers awaits her. The girl exclaimed that, of course she had to go there. She immediately approached the door, began to open it, and declared that this was definitely it. But when she opened the door, she was simply shocked to see in front of her a lot of people in hoods and a little boy on the floor. She couldn't understand what was going on here. The boy was lying on the floor in some kind of occult circle with various symbols. She remembered the dream in which she had seen this boy, and raising his head, he tearfully asked for help. This was the same child she'd seen in her dream, and he looked so unhappy. She couldn't figure out what was going on here. The man in charge turned to the little girl. He explained that she couldn't enter without permission. Axel appeared next to Lesha, opening the door and asking with horror what had happened to her. When he opened the door and found himself on the threshold, he saw in front of him a man and guys in black robes and hoods. The boy recognized the man as Duke Kreutze. The Duke also recognized Axel. The Duchy of Elfanad and the Duchy of Kreutsch are the two pillars that support the empire. If the Alphanate is the brain of the empire, then Kreutsch is the sword of the empire. It is said that the post of swordmaster passed to Duke Kreutsch because Duke Elfanate was unable to fill it. Licia was deep in thought and had a bad feeling as she looked at this duke. Crocia asked Sir Axel what he was doing there. Axel also told his lordship that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Duke Kreutsch asked if he should be busy with business in the tower. Looking at the boy, he asked again what brought them to the temple. Axel explained that his younger sister wanted to explore the temple, so they went for a walk. Dukes looked closely at the girl and declared that this was the very same adopted daughter. He thought to himself that entry to the temple should have been forbidden. Axel explained to the man that this was the same Lady Elfanad, the Duke's adopted daughter. The man said that she was still very young and therefore had made a mistake. He shouldn't misunderstand him, he explained, gesturing to the boy sitting on the floor, that he was performing a ritual blessing for his sick son. Axel thought that it didn't look like a blessing at all. He asked about his son, since the Duke didn't have one. The Duke explained that he had recently secretly adopted a child and called him his illegitimate son. In front of them stood a weak boy, about the same age as Lesia. Moreover, it seemed an unusual ritual was being performed in this chapel. The Duke asked if they could leave now, as he needed to complete the ritual for the sake of his son. But Lesia's intuition told her that she must stop this ritual. The Duke leaned over the girl and said he was glad to meet Saint Lesia. Since they had already met, he asked if she could also grant him the saint's blessing. Axel noticed that he just deliberately blocked his path. Beads of sweat began to trickle down his face as he continued to watch the proceedings. Everyone already knows the girl can't use divine power. The Duke has no way of knowing this, and it seems he simply wants to get rid of her. Licia, clenching her fists, decided to see what he would say to that. The Duke suddenly addressed her as Highness. The girl exclaimed with a smile that she was also glad to see him, and exclaimed that Licia would give him a blessing. When she said this, she approached him and hit him on the head with all her might. The Duke was very surprised and did not understand what she had just done. The girl exclaimed again, approaching the man, that this was the saint's blessing. She continued to beat the Duke and ask for his blessing. She was beating all the bad energy out of him. Lesia smiled and said that the saint's blessing had been successfully received. The man was very surprised and his face was red, and there were large red bumps sticking out of his head. Axel stood to the side, grinning at what he saw. The Duke's men were also simply shocked and unable to do anything. The girl came closer to him and asked, looking sweetly into his eyes, if the Duke was angry with her. The man started touching his head and, smiling, said that he wasn't anymore. He started laughing and said that he definitely wasn't angry. Licia said that if this was true, then she asked for another blessing and hit him on the head with all her might again. Then, the girl approached the boy who was lying on the floor and began to lift him by the hand, trying to help him get up. The boy was very weak, and looking at the girl, he asked who she was. Licia smiled and explained to the boy that he was the one who kept calling her for help. That's why she was going to help him now. But the Duke was already behind the girl, saying that Eugene was a very sickly child, and grabbed the girl by the shoulder. Kreutsch told Lesia that he had to undergo a blessing ritual, and he asked the saint not to disturb him by pushing the girl away. Axel also approached the Duke and, grabbing him by the hair, said that his treatment of the saint, calling him Highness, was rather rude. He replied, I've already put up with so much because she's a young saint. If he continues to interfere with the ritual over his sick son, he won't just stand there idly either. Meanwhile, the boy covered his ears with his hands in fear and terror. Looking at the boy, Lesia couldn't understand what kind of ritual this was, since he was suffering so much. The Duke told Eugene that the saint was worried about him and asked him to tell her himself. He asked her to perform a blessing ritual for him. Then the boy listened to the Duke and in fear asked the girl to perform the blessing ritual. The Duke, with a terrible and sarcastic expression on his face, said to Axel and Lesia that since they had heard everything, they should leave. Meanwhile, the boy was thinking that this was all very, very amazing. And isn't it strange that the boy suffered so much, yet he claims everything is fine? The girl asked Axel if there was a way to separate him from the Duke. The boy replied that he was still Duke Kreutsch's son, albeit an illegitimate one. If they acted carelessly, it could lead to a war between their families. Lesha exclaimed that this was unacceptable and that they needed to find another way. Axel immediately began to think of a way to do this. He needed to use a force greater than his family's. The girl couldn't understand what he was talking about. What power could be greater than family? The ivory tower, located in the possession of Duke Elfanad, rose up, delighting with its strength and fear. The ivory tower was created to interpret divine prophecies. It is an independent educational institution where geniuses from across the empire gather, regardless of their status. The first emperor decreed that select talents could not refuse an invitation to the ivory tower to interpret prophecies. Moreover, the criteria for selecting talent are so high that not only aristocrats, but also members of the royal family began to consider an invitation to the ivory tower an honor. Since then, the Elfanad family, generation after generation of dukes who had produced scholars from the ivory tower, has achieved even greater fame and honor as a family that supports and protects the tower. An invitation from the ivory tower is more than an imperial decree. If Eugene were invited to the ivory tower, then even Duke Croix wouldn't be able to refuse. This is what Axel told the girl as his plan. Licia was overjoyed, clenching her fists and exclaiming that he was very smart. But he added that once she got in, she'd have to work tirelessly on research until graduation. Licia suggested kidnapping the boy after all. Axel explained that the Elfanad family had graduated the most students to enter the ivory tower in its entire history. Her father is also the chairman of the ivory tower's admissions committee, so there won't be any problems with the invitation. And it's time for her to start preparing too. Lesha asked Axel what exactly. The boy explained to the girl, looking seriously into her eyes, that she too should go to the ivory tower. And now there was a whole stack of huge, thick books in front of the girl. She looked menacingly and asked what this mountain of books was. Beads of sweat began to trickle down her face, and she glanced sideways at Axel. The boy replied that these were her preparation materials. She became even more angry and asked if she really needed to learn all of this. Axel replied that there was more to it. He would review it separately. Licia, with a sad expression, asked the boy if she really needed to apply. Maybe she should use dark magic. Axel explained to the girl again that he had already told her she was a saint. Soon, the temple would require her return to test her abilities. But she lacks divine powers, and she also uses forbidden dark magic. Therefore, she needs to enter the ivory tower all the more. It's the only independent place recognized by the imperial palace. That way, they'd have a pretext to turn down the temple. Licia offered to place her on a recommendation, just like Eugene. Axel explained that he too would have to pass an exam there and wondered if the former dark sorceress was scared. The girl smiled and replied that, come what may, she would do it. The boy remarked that it was a rather wise decision. Licia thought about the books in front of her, which dealt with dark magic, and how she understood it. But that wasn't what was most important. This formula was. She had a problem in front of her, and she needed to know what formula would solve this problem. The girl exclaimed that this was the correct answer, and that this problem should be solved according to the Aboridzon Terrace formula. Axel told Lessa that the future was uncertain, even very uncertain. She was even confused by the mathematical formula he had just explained. The girl replied that she was interested in nothing but dark magic. Why is everything so complicated? She thought with the memories of her past life, it would be easy. Well, she definitely won't do that. Axel smiled and said it was too early to give up, since with her, he was an ivory tower graduate, and the best one at that. Lesya made me wonder if he was really studying, not just having fun. Axel said his brother would explain everything to her in order and asked them to try again. The maid entered the room with a tray and noticed how diligent they were. When the girl had solved a multitude of problems, she exclaimed that she had finally gotten everything right. The maids immediately praised her and said she was simply brilliant. Could these really have been problems about basic concepts? Licia was pleased with herself and said, I wasn't her cup of tea back then. She thought to herself that learning can be fun too. They called the young lady simply amazing. If she needed help, they asked her to contact them anytime. And so, several days passed. The day was simply beautiful and sunny. Licia, after having already solved many problems, fell asleep right on the table on one of the thick books. Axel entered the room and, looking at the girl, thought that she looked very tired, and that's why she fell asleep. The boy decided to give her a little rest. Lessa told him in a dream that she would definitely save him. Who was this child really? And why did he appear in Graceline's dream and ask for help? It was all very mysterious. Axel continued to watch the girl and think about the situation. He decided that since this was what she wanted, he would help her achieve it. A little time passed. When the girl had probably already had enough sleep, Axel began to wake her up and asked if she was really going to sleep all day, she asked in surprise when he had arrived. Axel replied that he had sent Eugene an invitation to the Ivory Tower. Leisha smiled and exclaimed that it was simply excellent work. Axel said that in that case, he urged her to hurry up and finish her homework. Even if they both end up in the Ivory Tower, one fact remains. This is all for Graceline. When Axel was leaving the girl, he thought that he felt very uneasy in his soul. Meanwhile, Duke Croix held the paper in her hand and thought about the Ivory Tower. Could this really be the work of that girl from Elfanad? He too felt sad, thinking about it and remembering the saint. The Ivory Tower is a place of independence, where even the emperor cannot interfere. And it was precisely there that Eugene had to be invited. The man, looking at this paper, said, lowering his head, that this was a very clever idea. A man approached his office and asked if he had summoned him. The Duke told his confidant that he had. He explained to the man that Eugene had received an invitation to the Ivory Tower. His confidant replied to the Duke that the Ivory Tower was supposedly the place where every family dreamed of sending their children. He sincerely congratulated his lordship. They said the invited guests must pass an entrance exam and needed to prepare. The man decided to see if Eugene was worthy of admission to the Ivory Tower. The boy was already sitting with a musical instrument in his hands. The Duke looked at the boy thoughtfully, thinking that as a father, he was worried about him. Eugene was in very poor health, and he didn't know if he would be able to study properly. One day, when Lesia was diligently preparing for her Ivory Tower exams, a maid was standing nearby. She asked her mistress if she had enjoyed the day's classes. The girl looked her in the eye and replied that she liked it and that it was quite good. She thought to herself that Axel had explained everything quite well. The Duke ordered that she, the young lady, from today onwards, should use the new room in honor of her upcoming birthday. Lesia was very surprised when the maid opened the door for her and showed her her sparkling, beautiful room. The Duke's mansion, Elfanad, was before her, specifically the Sapphire Room. Lesia was amazed that this was now her room and such luxury. The maid explained that using rooms named after precious stones was a tradition for the direct heirs of the Elfanad family. This meant he recognized her as a direct descendant. The previous room had been nice too, so why had they given her this particular one? The maid asked the girl to rest and said she would be back for dinner. Lesia began to wonder if perhaps he really did like her. She remembered the Duke's face and, crossing her arms over her chest, thought that this still couldn't be true. Well, now she will enjoy luxury and pleasure, as befits a duke's daughter. Noah clenched his fist as he appeared at the door of the room and asked the girl to get out of there immediately. She couldn't understand what he was doing there or what he was even saying. Lesia explained to the boy that this was her room and that the Duke had given it to her. Noah said that Grandpa couldn't give this room to someone like her. She was just an adopted child, and how could she accept his gift? Noah begged her to refuse immediately and return to the outbuilding. Lesia asked why she would do that. She didn't want to, and it was her room, so if he wanted someone to leave, they should leave themselves. Ordinary Lesia, due to her timid nature, would not have been able to answer properly, but she had already become quite accustomed to this body. The boy ran up to the girl and slapped her cheek with his palm, almost sending her flying. He explained that he hadn't meant to do it and that his hand had done it on its own. Then the girl, calling him a brat, began to approach and bit his hand. She asked, how dare he lay a hand on her? Noah began screaming and tearfully begging to be let go. The girl continued to bite him, now on his legs, and he asked if she was a dog. Lesia told him it was his own fault, as he'd brought out her animal nature. While they were fighting, the Duke appeared in the room and asked with horror what they were doing. He looked at them sternly and asked them to explain. Lesia pointed at the boy and said that he told her to get out of the Sapphire Room. He said she had no rights because she was adopted. The Duke turned to Noah and asked if he really said that. The boy immediately let out a heavy sigh, lowered his head, and replied that yes. But his aunt isn't even a direct descendant of the Elfanad family. They don't even share any blood. And she just suddenly appeared and got the sapphire room. He's Grandpa's real grandson, and everyone talks about nothing but Lesia. They don't even pay any attention to him. And the boy exclaimed with tears in his eyes that he hates them all. The girl blushed slightly and wondered if there was anything she could do about this situation. She realized he was briefly jealous. He's jealous because she's taken all the attention that used to go to him. That's why he's acting this way now and shedding tears. Leisha came closer to him and thought he was evil because he did nothing but torment her. But he was just a child. The man turned to the boy again, calling him by name, and he immediately raised his head in his direction, a little frightened. He walked up to him and, grabbing him by the face, began to explain that it doesn't matter whether there is someone or not. He is him. As the future heir of the family, he must have one quality: to be himself and not to be influenced by the words and actions of others. After the Duke said this, the boy immediately apologized to him. The man explained that their quarrel was so intense due to his indifference. Due to the suppression of monsters in the border region, he had no time for children at all. He apologized to them for this wayward adult. The Duke approached these children and hugged them, pressing himself against them with affection, treating the boys with affection. Noah, suddenly wiping away tears, said he was very sorry too and asked his aunt for forgiveness. He promised not to do it again. Leisha was surprised and, looking at the boy, realized that he seemed to be repentant. Besides, the Duke, who she thought was ignoring her, seemed to be simply very busy. The man was holding her other hand with one hand, and it was covered in scars. She even felt a little ashamed and said she was sorry too, and that she'd misunderstood Noah and the Duke, so she was asking them to live peacefully. Lesia smiled at Noah and said that family shouldn't quarrel. When the girl said this, both the Duke and the boy looked at her in surprise. Meanwhile, Axel stood behind the wall and thought with a smile that it seemed his intervention was not needed in this situation. Graceline is too soft-hearted anyway. He said this with a smile and a slight blush. Because the boy thought that this was still her beautiful trait and headed towards the exit straight down the corridor, time flew by and the day of the entrance exam arrived. Lisa, clenching her fists, headed toward the room. She received overwhelming support from her maids, who told the young mistress they were rooting for her and that she could do anything. Noah and Axel also supported her. The girl was elated, and clenching her fists, she exclaimed that she was challenging the ivory tower, some kind of test that she would pass with flying colors. Lesia was psyching herself up in the spirit. Suddenly, the man in glasses extended his hand forward and exclaimed, without letting go of the paper, that they had a genius. The woman standing next to me said that 2 people had passed the entrance exam with the highest score, and that was simply unbelievable. The guy in glasses asked to look at the answers. He held up Lesia's exam paper and exclaimed that both had written perfect answers, and that one of them didn't even have any solutions. This meant he'd solved everything in his head. The bespectacled teacher continued to be amazed and said that they should immediately enroll these talents as soon as possible. The woman clasped her hands and said that they had 2 outstanding students, and as a teacher, her heart was aching. They wondered what kind of students they were. And then came the day when they were congratulated on their entry, and the maid stood beside the young mistress. Her diligent studies until late at night had paid off, and she received a perfect score. It was simply amazing. Leisha immediately thanked the maids for their emotions and praise. She thought to herself that she had a legendary intuition that had never failed her, and that it was very strong. On the day of the entrance exam, the students were all sitting in their seats, and the teacher announced that they were starting the exam. The girl thought that the exam had finally begun and remembered with a smile the results of all her studies. She was sweating a little, thinking over the problems and occasionally talking out loud. Axel kept saying the exam wasn't difficult and that it would be easy. Why was everything written in an ancient language, and she couldn't understand a thing? Leisha, determined not to embarrass the family by getting 0 points, tried to concentrate. She forced herself to read the question one letter at a time and decided the answer was hidden in the question itself. This intuitive feeling and her intuition shone again. She couldn't understand that she had suddenly sensed the answers to all her questions. Was it possible to use her intuition skill this way? Lesia thought she wouldn't be able to decide anyway, so she'd just have to guess. Lesia, having literally guessed correctly, received a perfect score. Let's return to the present, when the girl was rejoicing at her success and receiving congratulations. Axel, watching her, thought she would barely pass, but a perfect score was truly unexpected, and the plan in case of failure could already be cancelled. Moreover, the fact that Eugene himself acted on his own was also quite unexpected. The maids circled around with the girl, talking about how two of them had gotten top marks. Lesia told them it was Eugene with the second talent. One of the maids mentioned that her friend had also received a top score, and that this was truly news. They were very curious about what kind of person he was. Lisa suddenly asked the maids if she could invite Eugene over for a tasty meal. They thought it was a great idea. Then, the maids decided to prepare an invitation for the Croix family. And so, it was the evening before the entrance exam. They wholeheartedly congratulated Lesia on her arrival in the ivory tower. The girl could not understand when the Duke, who was the first to congratulate her, managed to join them. He also sincerely congratulated the young Duke, Eugene Croix. The boy immediately thanked the Duke for the invitation. The man thought about it and said he was Lesia's friend, so such a treat would be just right. Axel replied that they had put special effort into the food, so let them begin. Eugene sat next to the young lady and looked at his plate. He felt as if he would be scolded if he didn't eat it all. Lesia was asked if she would be 7 years old this year. When the girl said yes, they exclaimed, meaning they were the same age too. The girl noticed, looking at Eugene, that he seemed very tense and that he might choke now when he ate. Lesia decided she needed to lighten the mood and started screaming with joy. The girl exclaimed that getting a perfect score was simply amazing and he was a genius. When the girl said this, the boy immediately looked at her in surprise and said that he was not exactly a genius. Then, lost in thought, he put his hand to his cheek and explained that he'd come across a formula from a book he'd seen the day before and that he'd been lucky. But Lesia said she thought he was a genius and she didn't even understand what he was talking about. Lesia smiled and told him that it was still good. She'd wanted to be friends with him ever since they met, so she'd been studying hard too. The girl asked the boy to address her informally, since his birthday was even earlier than hers. The maids listened attentively and smiled sweetly. Then one of them approached the boy and asked if he by any chance liked steak, since it was the main course. This steak came with a special sauce from the chef. When a shiny, delicious-smelling steak appeared in front of the boy, Lesia explained to him that it was very tasty and that it simply melted in his mouth. She asked the boy to try it quickly and began teaching him how to hold a fork and knife. When Eugene tried a piece, he exclaimed that it was delicious. Lesia remarked that she'd already told him it was truly delicious. The Duke and Axel watched them with smiles on their lips. Lesia asked him to eat more. She noticed Eugene's violent reaction and wondered if the food in the Duchy of Croix was really that bad. She herself had been the same until recently. She didn't know how to use cutlery either, just like he didn't. It felt like he was eating this for the first time. He might have been poorly cared for in the duchy, but now she would take care of him herself. The girl asked him to try every dish. It seems she embarrassed the boy, and the Duke asked her if Dad could eat something too, asking her for a plate. Axel explained that he too wanted something sweet today. The boy asked for a plate for his brother too. The girl looked at him in surprise too, and wondered why they were both suddenly acting like this. After all, she was right in front of them, and they were asking her for a plate. Lesia exclaimed that she'd bring it all right away and went to get the dish. The maids started talking about how they could do it themselves, and she became even closer to the family. The Duke remarked that in the ivory tower, entrance exams are the same for all ages. It must have been difficult to solve all the problems that would be difficult even for adults, and it was truly amazing. Eugene held a fork and knife in his hands and said that they were just problems that needed a little thinking. Axel called the boy very modest and said he was the complete opposite of Lesia. The girl glanced sideways at the boy, wondering if she could still hear him. Does she happen to know the formula used in white magic for circulation? Lesia sighed heavily and said that it was time for her to eat too. The girl asked if he knew this formula, to which he replied that he knew and had once seen it in a book. Suddenly, the boy turned to Eugene and asked if he would like to become his apprentice. The boy was very surprised, and the girl choked too. The Duke asked Axel if he was serious. The boy replied that he was, and that he was just about to find himself an apprentice. As he probably knows, he's a white mage who also happens to be the head of a magic tower. He was also a member of the expedition that defeated the Mad Dragon 10 years ago. If he develops sufficient strength himself, he won't have to suffer so much anymore. Perhaps he can even change his predetermined fate. Axel thought about it and said that it would be difficult to find a teacher better than him in the Empire. But the choice was still his. And the boy, covered in beads of sweat, looked closely at Axel. Eugene simply opened his mouth at such a proposal and stared at the boy, not knowing what to say to him now. After thinking for a moment, I asked if he thought he could handle it. After all, he had just entered the ivory tower. Then the boy replied that he had done it with flying colors. That's why he was making the offer now. The boy explained to Axel that this was precisely why he didn't know whether his father would allow him. Axel said he wasn't asking him to decide right now. Even if he agreed, he'd first have to get used to the ivory tower. He asked the boy to think carefully, and Lesia decided that Axel probably did it for Eugene's sake. But it was natural for him to be wary of a stranger's kindness. Besides, this would be his first time spending the night at the Duke's mansion. She wondered if he'd be okay. Eugene, for his part, was very thoughtful, and lying in bed, he wondered why he had made such a proposal. Why no one had stopped him. If they saw what he saw, they wouldn't want to keep him around. But what if he becomes his disciple, and maybe something will change after all? He recalled his past, the pain he had experienced. It was as if someone had told him it was impossible, and whether he thought the Elfanad family would protect him, there was no point in getting his hopes up. He knows how they'll react when they find out what a dirty child he is. Then his life will definitely end. It was as if there were some voices in his head, and he grabbed his ears and exclaimed that he was very stupid to apologize. He imagined himself to be much cleaner, but his filth wouldn't wash away, no matter how many rituals he performed. After all, he won't think about all this nonsense and will live quietly as always. Lesia asked Eugene what he was saying. The girl was standing next to a boy who was covering his ears with his hands. She asked him if he was having a nightmare. The boy asked the girl why she was there, and she smiled happily and waved her hands. After all, tomorrow was the first day of school, and she couldn't sleep because of it. She couldn't say it just suddenly dawned on her. She told Eugene that she thought maybe he was also feeling uneasy, so she came. But suddenly she heard his voice from behind the door. She apologized for entering without permission. The boy replied that he simply couldn't sleep because he was sleeping in a new place, that he was fine, and asked her not to worry. Lesia, looking at him, thought that he looked quite worried. She had come here on a whim, but what should she do? Did she have any item that helps her sleep? She's been making donations lately, and there aren't many coins left. Suddenly, the girl came up with a plan and asked Eugene if he would go somewhere with her. The girl explained that she would help him fall asleep. She would take him to a place where he could sleep soundly, even if there was noise around him. She was already with the boy on the street, and then he asked if this place was here, looking at the green glade. The girl explained to the boy as they approached the clearing that they were now going to look for 100 clovers. When they were finished, he would fall asleep before he even realized it. Eugene began to remember, because according to his recollections, there was no sleeping pill stronger than physical labor. Lesia asked him to come to her quickly and beckoned him to follow her, smiling. Eugene crossed his arms over his chest and asked her not to try so hard for him. That would only make her tired and make her go to bed even later. The girl turned to him and said that she was trying not only because of his sleep problems. Then he apologized to her and asked why they were there now. Lesia explained that if they shared their clover with the other students on the first day, they would be able to make lots and lots of friends. The boy said he'd simply misunderstood and felt ashamed. Lesia said she'd hoped she and Eugene would get closer this way. What he said in the room and how guarded he was at dinner kept bothering her. She thought that if they got a little closer, his guard would ease. But now he probably thinks she's really weird. She decided she didn't need to apologize. After all, she was doing this for herself. Licia looked up at the sky and was struck by the idea of collecting just 100 four-leaf clovers. Everything here was covered in clover, so they'd be able to gather it quickly. The boy listened to her, bowed his head, and replied that he would help her collect clover. Once they'd sorted through the plants, the girl exclaimed that it was simply wonderful, and there were definitely more than 100 of them. She immediately praised Eugene. The girl thought that this made the quest much easier. If she could hand out all these clovers at once, that would be very good. Eugene thanked the girl and, looking at her, asked if she had tried to ease his tension. Eugene replied that he hadn't interacted with other people much before and didn't know how to act. He's not actually that afraid of sleeping alone. It's just that before he arrived in the Duchy of Elfanad, his flute was taken away. Licia asked curiously what he was talking about. The boy explained to the girl that it helped him feel no pain during the cleansing ritual. That's why he always carried it with him. He must have been worried when it was taken away from him. Licia thought it was very strange, and the purification ritual she'd undergone in her past life hadn't been painful. Could it be that Duke Croix had confiscated the flute? The boy suddenly smiled, turned to the girl, and said that today, thanks to her, he thought he would be able to sleep peacefully. He'll consider the offer to become an apprentice and probably be rude about refusing outright. Lesia says he'll understand everything in time, and it seems she's become a little closer to Eugene. The girl asked the boy if they had already picked the clover, and could they go to bed now? And he immediately agreed. The boys had already begun to rise from the green meadow and head towards the house when Eugene turned to the girl again. He explained that he wanted to ask something else, and she began to listen to him attentively. The next day, their first day in the ivory tower, they were walking down the hallway together again. Lessa told Eugene she'd slept so soundly she'd almost been late. The boy asked if she had brought the clover, and the girl replied with a smile that of course she had. She asked Eugene to trust her. Lesia turned to him and smiled, and said that she would tell everyone that he helped her. Then he will also have a lot of friends. And the boy immediately became frightened and stared at one point, asking about it. Then he exclaimed that one friend was quite enough for him. Someone off to the side inquired about the bickering. If he keeps pretending to be good, does he think he'll become anything? He didn't like this little guy at first. And why is he ignoring him now? When Lesha saw these guys, she became curious about what they were doing and immediately ran to the monitor. A sudden quest appeared before her. And what about its content? She looked closely and wondered if this really was a quest from heaven. No matter how many coins they gave me, this was pure villainy. It was necessary to teach the bad guy who disobeyed his elders a lesson. This was definitely a gift from heaven, not demons. The girl immediately turned towards Eugene and asked if he could do her one small favor. The guys who were near the boy, bullying him, immediately turned towards the girl who was behind them. When the boys saw the girl in front of them, they wondered who this little one was. Lesha asked if they knew about not bullying friends. Then, one of the guys asked her what other friends she had. Did she think they were friends with that loser? The boys called her a trifle and told her to go her own way if she didn't want to get hurt. Then, Lesia asked if they wanted to be friends, but they were ignored, and that made them angry. Therefore, under the pretext that he was too smart, they began to mock those who were younger than them. The boys immediately asked what she was saying. Then, the boy who was being bullied said he didn't even know that. When he raised his head, Lesha was very surprised and recognized the child. The boy exclaimed that he too didn't want to be friends with fools, so he asked them to give up and leave him alone. After these words, one of the guys clenched his fists and called him an idiot. The girl decided that if things continued like this, something terrible would happen. One of the boys nudged the boy and asked if he was still showing off until the very end. A guy with glasses appeared in the room and asked Klassen if he had just used violence in the ivory tower. He had noticed their bad behavior before and given them warnings, but he was deeply disappointed in them. The man asked to follow him immediately to the interview room. Eugene was standing next to the teacher and, leaning out, called out to Lesia. The girl exclaimed with a smile that he had done a great job and had shown his class. It was truly just in time. The girl approached the boy who was being bullied and asked if his name was Leonid Cole. She smiled and said it was nice to meet you and that she was Lesia Elfanad. Then the boy asked her if she was stupid. The girl looked at him resentfully and asked why. He replied that apparently she knew nothing at all and that rumors about her were now circulating throughout the tower. She became very curious and asked what exactly the rumors were. The boy stared at her, wondering whether to tell her or not. He began to explain, after a short pause, that there were rumors that she had come here thanks to the Elfanad family and the church. Licia exclaimed in horror that this simply couldn't be true. Then, turning to Leonid, she asked if it mattered. The boy replied that of course it did, and that those rumors were circulating about him too, which was why they were bullying him so much. Didn't she know that the County of Cole and the Duchy of Elfanad were on friendly terms? Lesia replied that she didn't know that. Leonid said that was good, and since she knew it, she shouldn't approach him again. He didn't want them both to be exhausted by unnecessary communication. Eugene noticed the cruel boy and wondered if Lesia was offended. He asked the girl if she was okay. But she didn't answer him, and Lesia suddenly ran towards Leonid, asking him to wait a little. The boy didn't expect this and stopped, turned his head in her direction, asking what else she wanted. Licia handed him a 4-leaf clover and explained that it was especially for him. She invited Leonid to befriend her. The girl thought to herself that she couldn't just leave this boy alone. Well, it's just an exact copy of him, and he's still too small, so you can't tell for sure. The girl told the boy that he was definitely more like him than his wife. She hoped he wouldn't take after her in personality. Then the man asked what was wrong with his character. The girl explained that although he seemed gentle and kind, he was actually very stubborn. With that kind of personality, you wouldn't make friends. The man asked Graceline if she was describing herself. Leonid wanted to tell her again that if she communicated with him, it would be bad for both of them. Lacey replied that she too had gotten in after passing the exam. The girl asked Leonid if he had gotten in too. He wondered why she kept up with him. The girl handed him the 4-leaf clover again and asked him to ignore the rumors. She again invited the boy to become friends. How cute he is! And could this child really be the same baby? Now he's a dead ringer for Servianus. Leonidas asked the girl if she knew the definition of clonata. This is the Bastule formula, or the altastanide inflection point concept. The girl asked in response what Bastule was. Leonid replied that he had assumed she didn't know. Eugene suddenly blurted out that he knew. He explained that this was something that could be used with Teresa's Averjan formula, and that Lesia had told him so. The girl realized Eugene's plan and exclaimed that it was all true and that she had told him so. Leonid, lost in thought, asked his name. Lesia thought that this boy was clearly ignoring her. Her friend introduced himself to Leonid as Eugene Kreutze. Leonid wondered if the rumors about Kreutze's actions were true after all. Since he knew such complex formulas, it was entirely possible. Then he asked the boy if it was true that he had entered with the best result. His family has no reason to make Kreutze an excellent student so he can get in. So there's no need to worry about rumors of unfair admissions. Leonid then decided to take the 4-leaf clover from the girl and reached out for it. When he took her hand, Licia extended it and asked him to decide whether he wanted to take it or not. Leonid said that if he ignored her, he wouldn't be able to befriend Eugene. He had few people he could talk to, so he wouldn't miss this chance. The girl was excited and, blushing slightly, looked at him in surprise. Leonid, taking the clover, said that he had hopes for her. Licia asked what that meant and wondered if she was the only one who didn't know what they were talking about. The next day in the Duchy of Elfanad, the man wondered who would have thought Graceline would go to the tower with his son. At this rate, she would truly become his daughter-in-law. If he finds out the guy said something like that, he won't forgive him. Char laughed and said he looked so serious, so he decided to lighten the mood a bit. And what exactly was going on? The boy explained that this concerned Eugene Kreutze, the son of Duke Kreutze. Lesia had already mentioned him. The purification ritual that Eugene went through was painful, and he suppressed the pain with the help of the flute he had. It's just his guess, but this ritual could be connected to Eugene being brought to the year of the Mad Dragon's death. Is his task to investigate this flute? The boy replied that everything was correct, and that once he obtained the flute, it should be immediately transferred via teleportation magic. He agreed, and asked for coordinates to be set to the ancient Sahara ruins. The boy felt pleased that he remembered these ruins. How could he forget the place where their extermination squad had once been? Indeed, a lot happened there, And this is the place where Graceline used dangerous magic and almost died. Even after she woke up safely, wasn't he still very angry? If it weren't for Bale, things could have ended very badly. Because that girl doesn't value her own life. The guy laughed and said he hadn't changed at all, judging by how hard he tried. But he didn't just want to reminisce about the past. Axel asked the boy what he wanted to say, if he had anything else to say. The boy replied that he was, after all, very perceptive. Then he wants to ask and hopes these are just his empty fears. He asked Axel, otherwise he'll be left out. Then the boy asked what exactly he meant. The boy explained that he meant Graceline or Lesia. Which of the two was he looking at? Axel thought for a moment and replied, Graceline, of course! The guy asked if he'd think about it. Axel explained that he'd figure it out himself when he met her in person. She's become even more cunning than before. But if that's true, he should definitely come and take a look, because he wants to tease them, brother and sister, to his heart's content. Axel replied that he was imagining his face. And after this conversation, they said goodbye, and the boy was left alone, lost in thought. His thoughts were interrupted by Lesia, who suddenly appeared on the threshold and asked if she could come in. Axel replied that she had already entered, and the girl had asked him not to pay attention to the little things. The boy asked her what had happened when she arrived. Lesia explained it was about his offer to have Eugene become his apprentice. She wanted to know if he'd said it was for surveillance. Axel replied yes, and asked if there were any problems. Lesia wanted to know if everything would be okay. If it became dangerous, she'd never heard of any way to share magical power. Axel said it wasn't all that uncommon among white mages. Eugene has been undergoing an incomprehensible ritual for a long time. It's likely his body is out of balance. To restore this balance, he needs a supply of magical power from outside, and a person who will periodically look after him. So it's protection under the guise of surveillance. So she needn't worry about Eugene. Lesia asked Axel if this division of magical power would affect him. Axel smiled and said that of course he was the greatest of the living white magicians. The girl exclaimed, clenching her fists, that he was very unbearable, and she took back her words about worrying. Axel asked her not to worry about him. From now on, she'd better take care of herself, and the girl immediately glanced at him, as if asking something with her eyes. A letter arrived from the church, saying they'll soon test her holy powers. It seems they doubt her saintly qualities. Lesia looked at him in surprise and said that, judging by their confidence, they were up to something. Axel said that the ivory tower would hinder the church's request, while he would come up with the best plan. The girl exclaimed with a smile that she would think of something too. She had recently found a very interesting object. The next day, my second day in the ivory tower, the realization that there were people I could talk to made the trip to school quite enjoyable. Leonid asked Eugene how he knew the shape of Teresa's averjon. The boy replied that it was something like this. Lesia added that he said he once used this formula for various calculations. He learned it all himself from books and without a teacher. When she asked the boy if she was telling the truth, he immediately agreed. Leonid remarked that this was impressive, and that's why he was so different from his peers. Leonid told Eugene that, if he had any difficulties in the future, he could ask him. Lesia thought that perhaps she was imagining things, but there was a certain awkwardness between the two. Perhaps it was because Eugene was still shy. That was the senior class scholar who was standing near the door with books in her hands. Since that's the case, we should give that class some shamrocks too. Lesia told her classmates she'd quickly take the Clover there and ask them to go to class for now. She'd stop by a couple of places and then come back. Leonid remarked, after the girl had left, that she really was giving away such a useless thing as Clover left and right. Eugene replied to his friend that he wasn't useless. Leonid looked questioningly at Eugene, who replied that Lesia had been diligently searching for them in the clover field every night. That's why he wished he hadn't spoken like that. Leonid hadn't expected this boy to be able to speak normally. He asked if they had looked for this clover together, or if he had received a lot of four-leaf clovers from her. Eugene hesitated, blushed slightly, and said nothing. Then Leonid said that he most likely hadn't received the clover from her. That's why he was so cold to him, and the boy said he'd go to class. Leonid asked Eugene if he wanted him to tell her she'd forgotten to give him the four-leaf clover. The boy replied that he'd wait for Lesia to give it to him herself. Leonid exclaimed that he was unlikely to wait, since she was such a fool. Eugene again asked him not to call her a fool. After this phrase, Leonid now understood how to make friends with this guy. As the boy was leaving, he asked him if he should help him too. Hearing this, Eugene became interested and asked how. Then his friend smiled and asked him to simply trust him. But he would have to do everything as he said. Some time passed when the teacher announced that today's lesson was over. He asked the children not to forget their homework. Licia caught her breath and said she could hardly wait to stay awake in class. The girl asked the children to hurry outside. Leonid suddenly asked Lesia if they were really friends. The girl replied that they were. Leonid asked if they had shaken hands. The girl replied that no, and they hadn't. The boy added that in that case, they couldn't be called friends. He approached the boys and asked them to listen to him carefully. First, they needed to hold hands right now. They should remember that the correct way to shake hands is to move it up and down only twice. Despite this definition, some fools shake hands only once or more than 3 times. Licia extended her hand to her friend, thinking that sometimes he was worse than Servian. After they shook hands, Leonid asked the girl if anything had occurred to her. Didn't she realize there was something else that needed to be done? Eugene realized that this was most likely the help he had been talking about. After they shook hands, Lesha told Leonid that he should shake hands too, because they were friends. Leonid was surprised and said he'd never even read about shaking hands at the same time. The girl said it was okay. They were all friends and did everything together. She asked him to quickly shake Eugene's hand too. Then the boy asked Leonid to shake hands, just as Lesia was now telling them. Leonid said that he thought that only Lesia was a fool, but it turns out that he is a fool too. He approached them and, holding their hands, showed them what would happen if he did things their way. Should he even hang out with these fools? He asked them to let go of his hands first, and then start over from the beginning. Well, at least they wouldn't be bored. Just think, all this effort for a single handshake. Leonid called them fools again. When did they all manage to become so close? And it was all probably thanks to Eugene. In her past life, she couldn't have imagined such a life. She could never have imagined that she would have a family and friends. And the girl smiled sweetly, blushing a little. Is this really the feeling when their mere existence betrays one's strength? She's very happy that they've become friends and thinks everything will be wonderful for them. The girl continued to think with a smile on her lips and decided that they would be friends even if she was gone someday. Meanwhile, the woman asked how many more times they should repeat it. Even if it was because of the church, they wouldn't allow the church to forcibly take away a disciple of the Ivory Tower. Rumor has it that the Duke has increased security at the Ivory Tower, and perhaps that's why Cardinal Bale left the site of the 100 Days of Prayer without permission. It was Cardinal Bale who helped the little girl receive the title of saint. He vouched for the newborn's true sainthood and vowed that on her 7th birthday, he would test her holy powers. If her holy powers proved false, she would be brought to trial. But now, as the saint's birthday approaches and her sponsor, the cardinal, has disappeared, they intend to conduct their own investigation. They'll send an official document later, so they're asking for their cooperation. Their Kadisha church is obligated to protect the saint. Meanwhile, the girl opened the door to the room and greeted her friend. Eugene smiled back at her and asked Lecia to come in. He was sitting on a chair at a wooden desk. Lecia thanked Eugene for helping her pick Clover again over the weekend. Thanks to him, she finished quickly. The boy asked not to thank him, as he wanted to go himself. Lecia asked him to come again in that case. Licia glanced at Leonid and asked what he was doing there. The boy explained that there were some strangers standing at the entrance to the tower, and he didn't think they were teachers. The girl immediately became inspired and asked if there were really people in the Ivory Tower that he didn't know. When the girl looked out the window to see where they were, she saw people from the Kiddush temple in front of her. Did they really come to the Ivory Tower specifically for her? And the girl began to worry. She remembered Axel telling her that they seemed to doubt her saintly qualities. Judging by their confidence, they were up to something. When Lecia saw these people, she told her classmates she'd be leaving for a bit. Leonid asked why, since class was about to start. The girl explained, running away, that she had something very urgent to do and needed to leave. She was already behind the door and, running through the hallway, hid in one of the rooms. Lecia caught her breath and thought that no one would come in here. In front of her was a heavenly market that welcomed her to a special store for subscribers of Reincarnation products. Licia decided to look for the item she'd been eyeing, and she finally found it. It was a strawberry-flavored Saint Awakening stimulant. Its price was a full 1,000,000 heavenly coins. The girl exclaimed that it was very expensive. She thought that if she waited, the price would drop. But that didn't happen. The girl decided that in this case, nothing could be done, and under any other circumstances, she would not have even looked at her. But recently, she found a rather good item. And what is it? An awakening stimulant that could make her a saint. At that moment, Axel listened attentively to the girl, thinking about this. She explained to the boy that it was all true, and that he really was worth 1,000,000 heavenly coins. Wasn't that too expensive? And was she sure she could buy him? Licia said that was precisely why she'd been so diligent in distributing Clover. And most importantly, she'd received a hidden reward for helping Leonid. Axel asked if that was the only reason she'd helped him. Licia replied that not at all, and under any other circumstances, she would not have even looked at her. But if she uses the discount coupon she received as a reward, she will definitely be able to buy it now. But when she pressed the button, the system said the purchase was impossible and she didn't have enough coins. Lesia couldn't understand why, since she'd reached the required amount and was missing exactly one person. She decided she needed to earn some money quickly. When she opened the door, she saw Eugene standing there and asked why he was there. After she asked, she realized that he had appeared here for a reason, and that she began to remember whether she had given him Clover. Eugene replied that the teacher had been looking for her, and the girl had remarked that he had arrived just in time. He asked what she meant. Then the girl handed him a 4-leaf clover and asked if he could take it. She remembered that she hadn't given him the clover. Licia was overjoyed and considered this a stroke of luck. Now all she had to do was get the coins and buy the item right away. Eugene froze in place, holding the clover. There were tears in his eyes and he blushed slightly. Licia was surprised and asked the boy why he was crying. Eugene began wiping away his tears and apologized, saying he didn't know himself. He was just very happy and overwhelmed with emotion. Now the girl realized that all this time, he wanted to get the clover from her, which is why he was behaving like this. He kept hinting at it, but she didn't seem to notice. He kept asking if she was going to pick 4-leaf clovers today, and mentioning how those guys had just been holding the clover she'd given them. He thanked the girl again, and she felt guilty afterwards. The system indicated that her intuition was heightened, and it seemed someone would arrive soon. She realized there was no time at all. Lesha asked Eugene if he could close his eyes for a second, and the boy immediately agreed. While he closed his eyes, she began pressing the button to receive the item. The surprising thing is that it was an ordinary clover, but the boy was so happy simply because Licia gave it to him. Could this really be what she said that night? Eugene decided he would cherish it, never to lose it. The girl told the boy that he could now open his eyes. It was quite sudden, but she needed to tell him something. Eugene looked at the girl and remarked that her expression had changed and that her eyes were shining with tears. Licia explained to the boy that she might soon be leaving far away for a long time. She just thought she should tell him about it. He was very surprised and asked why she was leaving and whether they would never see each other again. Licia smiled and exclaimed, "Then of course not, and she will definitely return." But while she was gone, she wanted him not to worry about her. Eugene asked the girl if she would be back soon. Licia asked him to get along well with Leonid. When she returned, she promised to arrange a tea party for the three of them. The boy agreed, and Lessa asked him not to make such a sad face. She realized the effect was already taking hold, and for the first time, she felt such power. With such power, it's some kind of test for a saint. It's just dust. Before she could even think about it, a man in a robe appeared at the door and told her they'd been looking for her for a long time. Lesia didn't expect them to find her so quickly and began to push his comrade aside, staring intently at the hooded man. She understood perfectly well that they had come for her. The boy smiled slyly and asked the girl to come with them. When the boys found themselves outside, Eugene told Lesha that he wanted to ask her one more thing. The girl inquired about what exactly, and the boy asked if the clover field was very precious to her. Leisha turned to him and answered at that moment, "Of course it was." Then he asked her what she would do if it disappeared. For example, if she could never come here again. She couldn't understand why he was asking such questions, and Eugene explained that he was simply interested in what she would do in this case. Licia told the boy that she would probably plant a new field. He looked at her in surprise when she gave this answer. The girl added that, first of all, she will protect what is dear to her so as not to lose it. It doesn't matter whether this field is clover or something else, but it will be very sad if it suddenly disappears. And the boy looked at her sadly. Licia clenched her fists, smiled at Eugene, and asked, what about him? Does the flute fit the description? Although the anxiety was probably stronger than the sadness of the loss, Eugene kept thinking about that flute and what something precious even meant. He grabbed his head and apologized, saying he wasn't sure. Licia replied that he had nothing to apologize for. If he ever finds something like that for me, he should definitely tell her. They agreed that this was all good and decided to return home as soon as possible. Eugene bowed his head, agreeing with the girl, but could he ever find it? Something so precious, the loss of which he couldn't bear. While they were thinking about this, people in black robes approached them and held the boy back. Licia immediately ran away, and some kind of black smoke started coming out of her mouth. Those scoundrels from the heavenly market were the cause of a slight side effect from the strawberry-flavored stimulant. When the girl was captured, she was already in the tower, and the man was asking the others what was going on here. He explained that he had ordered the saint to be brought in, not to be allowed to bleed and faint. The man responded by asking him to be more careful with his words. He explained that they were only trying to take the saint away, but she suddenly started coughing up blood. The man who was sitting at the table said that at that moment, they felt a huge divine power. If this is true, then not only is their current plan not needed, but they also need the saint herself. He asked them to choose their words. All that matters now is that they've incurred Duke Elfanad's wrath. A plan of action must be developed immediately. He began to think frantically and said that this, of course, was also a big problem. Well, if you think about it, a healthy saint, full of divine power, vomited blood. And isn't that a bad omen? They decided that something was clearly fishy here. Indeed, Cardinal Caltus's words made sense. After all, the saint wasn't all that important from the start. Their original goal was to bring Cardinal Bael to trial as quickly as possible. Then, the charge would be the sin of misleading the world by presenting an unverified saint. Meanwhile, you are in the spacious, sunlit duchy of Elfanad. The guy who was sitting with his eyes closed said that from a medical point of view, it is difficult to determine her current condition. He sat opposite Licia, who was unconscious, and said that judging by the fact that the fever was not going down, despite all their efforts, it was possible that it was caused by some other force. The doctor turned to the boy and said that for now, all they could do was monitor her condition. Meanwhile, the maids clenched their fists and spoke of their young mistress with tears in their eyes. They didn't understand what to do now or what would happen to her. While they were crying and mourning the young lady, a man appeared on the threshold and apologized for the sudden visit. The man looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he was doing there and how he ended up there, especially with Axel. The boy explained with a smile that he had received a revelation to protect the saint, for she was in great danger. It was the cardinal of the Temple of Kiddush, Baal. The man asked if the danger was coming from the Kiddush church, to which he belonged. Baal replied that he didn't know the exact source of the impending danger. So, just in case, he went alone, without informing anyone at the church. He couldn't have imagined that they would use his absence from prayer as a pretext to try to take the saint. He apologized on behalf of the church for their extraordinary rudeness. At that point, the young man asked the cardinal if he had any idea about the child's current condition. He was told that the cause was medically impossible to determine. Simply put, it was because she was unable to control the sudden surge of divine power when her inner saintly power emerged. This is a rare but occasionally occurring phenomenon. The maids were very worried and couldn't figure out what to do in such a case. When great power is confined to a small space, it inevitably begins to rage. Cardinal Bael closed his eyes again and, holding his hands out in front of him, asked not to worry. He explained that he was going to use his divine power to leave in the saint's body exactly as much strength as she could withstand. The man asked the cardinal if he was sure it wouldn't harm the girl. Baal replied that he was, but there was one caveat. To transfer the divine power, no one must be near the saint. The Duke looked at the cardinal with concern, a man who had once served with Axel in a punitive detachment. He was, of course, deeply worried about this girl, and looked at the cardinal. The Duke replied, looking him in the eye, that he understood and they were going to leave him. Unexpectedly, he bowed before the cardinal and told him to take care of his daughter. When he heard that Lesia had started a new life, he was very worried. But these worries were in vain. After all, she had met such a good family, and he would do everything possible. Axel, in turn, was in such a hurry to get here that they didn't even have time to come to an agreement. But he was, as always, in his element. The boy thought that he was used to handling divine power, so there shouldn't be any problems. As he walked down the corridor, Eugene appeared in front of him. The boy turned to the young Duke Axel, who asked how he got in. He explained that outsiders were currently forbidden from entering the duchy. Eugene replied that he had entered with Leonidas's help. Axel initially wondered how this could be, but he remembered that this was, after all, Servian's son. He must have used his name to let him in. The boy stood in front of Axel and, clenching his fists, said that he had come to tell him, the young Duke, something. Axel listened attentively to the boy, and he said that it was about his previous offer to become his student. The boy replied to the boy that if he had wanted to refuse, he would not have come here at such a hectic time. This meant he accepted his offer. Eugene replied that he wanted to ask something first. Axel asked him to tell him what exactly. The boy replied that young Duke Axel had told him something back then. He spoke of how if he developed enough strength, he would no longer have to suffer, that he might be able to change his predetermined fate. To be honest, he wasn't confident in himself then and didn't know if he could cope. Axel, looking at Eugene, said that he entered the academy with the best results. He can be completely confident in himself. The boy explained to the other boy that he was a little scared. Axel asked if he was telling the truth. Eugene explained that after entering the academy, he began to live a completely different, peaceful, and interesting life. But sometimes he thinks that he is enjoying all this undeservedly, and that when he wakes up, all this will suddenly disappear. But if he has such an opportunity to change his destiny, who would he want to try? If he were to learn from him, from the young Duke Axel, would he be able to protect anyone? The boy replied, looking him seriously in the eyes, that of course it was possible. He can't give him such an encouraging answer. He can only help him achieve his goal. But he became curious and asked Eugene what his true purpose was. Eugene said, looking into Axel's eyes, that he wanted to become the one who could protect Lesia. Meanwhile, a cardinal was already near the girl's crib, who wanted to save the girl and thereby free her from the bad energy. He immediately felt that divine power filled her beyond all measure. However, if she carelessly combines her small body with her divine energy, it could also be very dangerous. All her divine power could be drained, and her life would be in danger. In that case, there's only one option left: temporarily bind his soul and the girl's soul together, and then transfer the excess divine power. The boy approached the girl, took her hand, and asked her to be patient a little longer. When he held her hand, it glowed golden, and the boy realized it was a good thing because the connection flow was perfectly stable. It might take a while, but he just needed to carefully transfer the power. If Axel hadn't warned him beforehand, she would have been in grave danger. He told Baal at that moment that he was counting on him greatly. The boy promised to be thoroughly prepared for this. No matter how much he thought about it, it was still very strange. As far as he knew, Axel had never cared about the existence of any saint. Baal told him then that if he were frank with him, he was sure he could help him somehow. For example, by telling him exactly what had happened to begin with. Axel thought that, as it turned out, this guy couldn't be fooled. He asked the cardinal to listen carefully and said that the girl he had declared a saint was Lesia. He explained to Cardinal Baal that this girl was Graceline's reincarnation. The boy asked if he was serious. Then Axel explained, at first he himself didn't believe it, but after Graceline's disappearance, he couldn't find any trace of her anywhere. He searched for her long and tediously, and even began to think he was hallucinating. Baal replied that he understood him perfectly. According to her, memories of her past life suddenly returned to her. Ultimately, he had no choice but to believe her. At that time, he told his friend that he himself would understand this when he met her. Stories that only a punitive squad could know, every stinging word she uttered. Everything suggests that she truly has returned to them. Whether he believes it or not, let him decide for himself, because he can definitely sense her energy. Bale opened his eyes and thought that this was why Axel had been so worried about the saint lately. Since he says so, he will go. He sets off unnoticed as soon as dawn breaks. He thanked the boy, and they agreed that they would see each other soon. And then came the very day when the girl was in the castle under the domes. Bale closed his eyes and thought that everything was as Axel had said. She was weak and hidden behind an overwhelming divine power, but he senses a tinge of familiar magical energy, and this force is definitely Graceline's. He clearly sensed it when he took the girl's hand. The girl felt so hot, as if she had fallen into boiling water, and as if her whole body was about to melt. The girl fell into this hot water and could not understand whether she would be able to return back to her real body. Licia continued to fly down into this seething, deep water, turning over in the strong, powerful current. Her gaze changed, and the girl realized that it really was Graceline. Now she understands why Axel so desperately asked for help. While calming the flow of divine power, Bale saw part of Lecia's memories. During this time, a lot has happened, and the girl has a new family and new friends. He saw her loyal friends, 2 boys who were truly willing to give everything for her. He saw Lecia's life, not Graceline's. The girl mentioned that she definitely still had some things to do. She promised to have tea with the 3 of them when she returned, and the boys immediately agreed. The girl stretched her hand forward through the ominous water and spoke of her promise to return. Just a little bit more, and she had to get out of here. The boy called Lecia smart, praising her. She heard a very familiar and dear voice. Bale, smiling, held her hand and told her that she had finally opened her eyes. The cardinal asked if she recognized him, and the girl immediately said that Bale stood before her. Licia told the boy that she had become ill from an excess of divine power, and that this divine power had been placed within the pearl. Bale said that, as her body recovered, he would gradually draw energy from her, and her capacity to contain divine power would gradually increase. Therefore, for the sake of the future, it was necessary to focus on recovery for now. Licia smiled and agreed. He must be tired, having rushed here so quickly. She thanked him, as it was thanks to him that she had survived. Bale explained that Axel had urged him to be prepared for any contingency. If you remember Lecia's past actions, he said that she cannot be trusted. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes very wide and asked Cardinal Bale if he knew that she was actually Graceline. The boy smiled and replied that no, and he'd learned that too, thanks to Axel's actions. Lecia asked what Axel had done. Well, no matter how you look at it, it's still strange. Axel isn't the type to go to such lengths for a saint he doesn't care about. He was asking at that moment what he cared about her, or so Lecia imagined. The girl told the boy that this was indeed true, and even she thought it was strange. Bale said that it meant he cared about Lecia for a reason. She asked Bale if he cared about her too. After all, he had rushed here upon hearing that she might be in danger. Licia, with a smile on her lips, extended her hand towards the boy and said that she was very glad to meet him again. He also gave her his hand, smiling. And who knows, although Axel really seems to treat her with special care. The boy shook the girl's hand and said that he, too, was glad to see her again. It was better to hear it from him himself. And so, several days had passed since Lecia had come to her senses. She thought it was time for them to come. The maid said that, judging by the head maid's words, Axel had been seriously consulting with Cardinal Bale every day lately. They were probably discussing this very incident. Lecia asked the maid if Noah had returned yet, or if he was too busy. He could have stopped by, at least for a little while. The maid replied with a sigh that, in fact, the young master had asked her not to tell her, but he came to visit her every night. The maid smiled and told the girl that this was indeed the case. She said this because the girl seemed upset. However, this must remain a secret to the young master. Licia lay on her bed, wondering if she was upset. As if she was worried or just angry that he hadn't come even once, even though he'd told Bale he was so worried. This time she had to catch him red-handed, and the girl tried to stay awake. Then she heard a noise and immediately exclaimed that he was here. Eugene and Leonid were standing at the threshold. Leonid remarked that, judging by the way she was moving, she was in quite good condition, and her complexion seemed to have returned to about 80% of its normal color. Leisha asked what they were doing there, and how they got there, and what about the dorm's curfew anyway? Leonid replied that he'd removed all the protective spells. If he wanted to, it wouldn't be that difficult to sneak out of a place like the Ivory Bathhouse. He'd also memorized all the routes through Elfanad. The girl was very surprised and asked if he really had taken them all off. And why had he dragged Eugene into this? Leonid replied that it was Eugene who had suggested coming here. The girl was very surprised and asked how he could do this because of her. Eugene asked in response if she remembered their conversation in the clover field. Leisha began to remember how she had told him that he needed to protect what was dear to him so as not to lose it. It was that very day when Eugene couldn't sleep, and the girl exclaimed that of course she remembered. The boy explained, clenching his fist, that he had something he wanted to protect. It was for this reason that he decided to become the young Duke Axel's apprentice. Lesia immediately congratulated Eugene, understanding the reason for his visit. Leonid thought that he had a feeling that they were about to have a frank conversation, and maybe he should step outside for a while. Lesia smiled and asked what he wanted to protect that made him decide to become Axel's apprentice. Leonid again silently called her a fool. She noticed that, judging by his expression, Leonid seemed to already know, but she didn't. Apparently, the one who doesn't know is the fool. Eugene asked the girl if she was in pain yet. Leisha smiled and replied that she was feeling much better. The boy said, "Thank God, just in case, he'll give it to her," and pulled his flute out of his pocket. She was surprised to see it in his hands. Eugene explained that he had actually come to give it to her. It would be bad if she got sick again while she was recovering. Looking at the flute, Lesha thought that she'd wanted to buy it for him, but if Eugene gave it to her, she wouldn't have to. She asked if he was sure he could give it to her. Eugene replied that yes, he could endure it now. And she, when she was in pain, if he blew into it, she would quickly recover. She wondered if using the accordion really could cure her illness. Eugene laughed and said that everything was fine, and that he had something else that was much more precious to him. The girl immediately exclaimed joyfully, thanking Eugene for the gift. She said she would use it and return it to him. Then she asked the boy if he would tell her what was so dear to him. Eugene replied that it was a secret for now. Lesha said that he had told Leonid, but Leonid figured it out himself, unlike such a fool. The boys said goodbye to the girl and asked her to get some rest. Leisha replied that they should be careful too, so as not to get caught. Leonid reflected that, as he'd said, he'd memorized both the map of Elfanad and the guard's time travel routes. Leisha waved and said that, after all, it was very tiring with children. By the way, it was somehow strange. She herself had undergone purification rituals with Baal several times, but it had never been painful. She doesn't feel anything at all. But maybe she should try blowing into this flute at least once. So, for the sake of the future, it was necessary to focus on recovery for now. Lesha decided that there was no point in causing unnecessary problems and would consult with Axel first. When the girl thought about this, she looked at the door and decided that he probably wouldn't come today. Those guys had probably returned by now, and he couldn't possibly be coming at such a late hour. Meanwhile, the boy was already walking down the hallway and saw Eugene in front of him. Luckily, he made up his mind faster than he thought. At least he didn't waste his talent. If Lesha ever finds herself in danger again in the future, he will definitely be a great support to her. He will protect her in any situation, even when it threatens him with death. Maybe what he wants to protect, what he wants to change, is the stupid white magician. When Axel walked through the entire corridor, he found himself at the girl's door and knocked on it, calling her by name Graceline. But at some point, he stopped and walked away from the door, deciding not to wake the girl. Before he could leave, she opened the door herself and called his name. She thought she heard footsteps, so she went out to check. She didn't expect him to actually come. It was just in time, and she had something to talk to him about. That's exactly it, and thanks to that, the troubles have eased a bit. The girl held a flute in her hands and said that she did not feel any special energy yet, and Axel said the same thing. He explained that they should ask Bale or Servian to analyze it. Lisa crossed her arms over her chest and frowned. She asked the boy if he had anything he wanted to tell her. This is exactly what the man says, who is so worried that he secretly comes at dawn, takes a look, and then leaves immediately. Axel explained that this was because if he saw her awake, he would not be able to refrain from moralizing. After she fell, he found an empty bottle in her bag. This appears to have been the cause of her loss of consciousness. This was the very same fine thing she'd spoken of, as he realized when he found it. Lesha, clenching her fists, exclaimed that it really was her. Axel said it was nothing, but something she was supposed to take internally. And how could she be so careless? Before buying anything, you need to check the exact ingredients and make sure there are no side effects. Then, he and Cardinal Bale would have been able to react more quickly. Lesia replied that she didn't have enough coins to buy it in advance. In any case, she now had holy power and was alive and well. Axel said that was the whole problem. It was her frivolous, simple idea. That's why she always acted so recklessly, and she could have asked him for help. She never thinks about those who worry about her. The girl asked if he was truly worried about her. Axel asked in return if she would have done the same in his place. He understands that she wants to find solutions on her own, but he would like her to share her opinions more and for them to think together, at least out of respect for their former friendship when they fought together. Unexpectedly, the girl thanked the boy, and he couldn't understand why. Lesia explained that she thanked him for being nervous and for saying it. Axel, closing his eyes, also thanked her for opening her eyes again. When the girl heard this phrase, she smiled and said that it was still true and he hadn't changed at all. Several hours had passed, the fire was burning in the fireplace, and 2 glasses of wine were on the table. The girl was standing next to her piglet, saying that she seemed almost fully recovered, then she'd better return to the ivory tower. Axel said he'd be dealing with the mad dragon, so since she's resting, she might as well rest a little longer. By the way, the chocolate Noah left behind turned out to be delicious. A maid standing nearby told the young lady that the Duke would soon enter. Lesia immediately asked her piglet to come back quickly, and the Duke had already opened the door. He asked Lesia if she was feeling better. The girl smiled and told the Duke that she was feeling much better and was now completely fine. Then he apologized for arriving so late. The discussion about what the church had done had dragged on, and the work had piled up. Lesia replied that everything was fine and that she was rather embarrassed, that it was because of her that there was so much noise in the mansion, and that he shouldn't worry about it. She feels she shouldn't be a further nuisance to those who care about her. Of course, she understands why Axel and Bale are even more concerned about her, but she still couldn't understand why the Duke cared so much about her. Lesia clutched the blanket tightly and decided to turn to the Duke. She looked sadly into his eyes and asked if he could take her back to the temple. He asked if she really wanted to go back to the temple. The Duke said that if she wanted to leave, he would let her go, because her desire was the most important thing. But if this is not the case at all, then he asks to tell him about it, and he will understand her. The man smiled at the girl, grabbed her gently by the cheek, and said that she could stay here as long as she wanted. After all, she is his daughter, and he will do what is most convenient and best for her. As a father, he will help her with anything she wants, no matter what it is. The girl immediately thought about his words about his daughter, even though they weren't related by blood and she was of no use to the family. The man, looking at the girl, said that confusion was still written on her face. He told his daughter that there was no need to complicate things. He was just worried about her because she was his daughter. The boy remembered the lilac he'd given the girl. He explained to Lesia that he simply wanted to keep the promise he'd made to his wife by welcoming her into the family. 7 years ago, the great temple of Kadisha towered as if reaching to the heavens itself. The man thanked Duke Elfanad for his visit. The Duke asked him what the matter was. The priest replied that he would get straight to the point and would like him to adopt a child. The man explained that this was a child who had received a divine revelation. But because he wasn't the one receiving the revelation, the child's situation was precarious. If this continues, her stay in the temple will expose her to many dangers. A family like his could be a very reliable and great fortress for this child. The man asked the Duke what he thought about this. The Duke replied that, as he must know, his wife had long since departed this world. Growing up without a mother wasn't the best environment. Well, the priest did not stop persuading him and said that this is exactly why he was asking him for Duke Elfanad. He had already raised his two sons well, and he began handing the girl over to the Duke. The priest asked him not to stand there, but to take her in his arms. And it was at that very moment that the Duke took this little beautiful girl into his arms. He noticed that this child's eyes were exactly like the flowers of a fragrant and beautiful lilac. She was born with a rare eye color. He gave him these lilac flowers and asks him to take care of her and raise her well. The Duke replied to the priest that he would adopt the child, but in return, he had one request. When the man told the priest about his request, he said that he would make every effort to achieve this. The Elfanad name will undoubtedly be a great strength for this child. However, this shouldn't be just empty words. The Duke told the priest that he wanted him to think of her in no way except the child. Not just a child entrusted to him by the church, but as a person of the Elfanad duchy. Only on this condition does he take this child. The Duke also added that he would like the church to agree with this, and that this is his only request. The priest replied that his request was in the spirit of Duke Elfanad. He had thought it would be something akin to a parent's request, so if that's the case, then so be it. If he becomes a safe home for the saint, the church will not interfere in her life, except for her activities as a saint. He will certainly become a true family for her. The girl looked closely at the Duke and asked if he had adopted her by force. She, of course, realized that was not the case. The man replied that this was indeed the case, even though he had been asked to do so. He ultimately decided to adopt her himself, even though he couldn't take care of her, hiding behind his busy schedule. When the Duke said this, he lowered his head, a little sadly. The Duke explained that he had always considered her his daughter. He hadn't known someone like her in his past life, and he never thought he needed one. But on the other hand, he was very curious. What would it be like to have such a person in your life? He suddenly looked at the girl and addressed her. She pulled the blanket over her head, not understanding why tears were flowing. She thought about how she shouldn't cry about this. Her appearance before she remembered her past life was completely different. Unlike the time when it seemed like she didn't have a single friend or ally, she now has someone she can call a real father. Why did these thoughts make her very scared? The Duke told the girl that if she didn't want to, she shouldn't say it anymore. Leisha replied that it wasn't so, and asked if she was needed in the Duchy of Elfanad. Could she really stay here longer? The Duke didn't like crying children after all. What if things continue like this? After all, she's become a saint. The Duke said she doesn't need to be a saint belonging to a temple. And she doesn't need to be a stoic child who can barely hold back her tears. In her own home, she can cry, laugh, and be angry as much as she wants. When the man said this, the girl immediately took it off her head. He continued to say that, therefore, if she didn't mind, he would like her to stay here. He asked her to show him her tears without embarrassment, so he could protect her, and asked if he could do so. When the Duke removed the sheet from her head, the girl looked at him intently. And so the next day arrived. Axel and Bale were sitting at the table opposite each other when a girl entered the room. Leisha told the boys that she had come and asked what had happened. The boy asked the girl if she was okay, peering closely at her face. Leisha hesitated a little and said yes. Later, when she came in and told the boys everything, Axel asked the girl if her father had told her that. Bale remarked that if she had heard that, it was no wonder she was crying. After all, Lesia sometimes looked on at what was happening, past the family, with a somewhat normal gaze. The girl said that things weren't that bad, and then said she was joking. Bale smiled and replied that it was nevertheless very good that she had met such kind people. The girl turned to Bale and said that she had heard something from the Duke, that he had recommended the Duchy of Elfanad as the place for her adoption. Leisha looked Bale in the eyes and immediately thanked him for giving her a family. At that time, the boy didn't know that it was Leisha, but he wanted the child who received the revelation to go to a good place. And when they started talking about the engagement, he calmed down, seeing the Duke's reaction. Hadn't his eyes deceived him, and hadn't the Duke told them so? Axel replied that he hadn't, and the girl said that they too were hearing about the engagement for the first time. If everyone found out it was about Count Cole's family, everything would be turned upside down. He'd heard that she'd already become friends with Leonid, but in any case, they refused, so don't worry. After that, the church made no more such offers. In any case, the Duke values Lesha very much. Recently, the duchy's security has been further strengthened. No matter how the church acts, they won't be able to approach her so easily alone. Axel said they would probably look at public opinion, and that the recently worsened atmosphere in the church would also play a role. Believers appear to support Lesha. The girl asked if this was because of the incident with the holy power. The boy replied that this was indeed the case because holy power really did emanate from Lesha. The girl listened to everything attentively and, surprised and a little embarrassed, closed her eyes and blushed. Axel asked what Bale would do now. The boy, lost in thought, said that Lesha had almost recovered. The accordion Axel showed him was clearly not a divine object. Axel asked him if he felt anything. The boy replied that there was no holy energy at all, and that it would be better to entrust this to Servian. Bale said that they would have to return anyway, and that there was probably a huge commotion in the church. Axel said he was going to find out more about the accordion then. He wouldn't be able to send it to Servian for now anyway. Lesha asked why and if something had happened. The boy explained that he was very confident and said he could handle everything on his own. But now he couldn't even contact him. Maybe he's digging through some ruins again, Lesha exclaimed with a smile that Servian had always been like this, so she thought he'd be in touch again soon. When Bale suddenly exhaled, the girl asked him what was wrong. The boy replied that nothing, and that he was just glad to see them like this again. It was a bright, sunny day outside, and the sun illuminated everything around, delighting everyone with its brilliant glow. Lesha asked Bale if he was leaving right now, to which he replied that he was, and that he'd been gone for a long time. Lesha remarked that they probably wouldn't be able to see each other for a long time, and she was very sorry. Bale responded with a grin that he didn't know, but he still thinks they'll see each other again soon. He was already approaching the two-horse carriage, and the girl asked him why he thought so. Bale suddenly interrupted the girl and asked her if she had anything she really wanted, or if she might be missing something she needed, and he could help with that. Lesha, of course, did not expect such a question, but after thinking a little, she said that it was very sudden and, it seems, not. When Axel overheard this conversation, he told the girl that he had far more connections than Cardinal Bale. If she wanted anything, she should tell him. The girl exclaimed that nothing of the sort was wrong, and that she had already told them so. She indignantly asked what was wrong with the two of them. The boys looked at her and remarked that Lesha, as always, was completely out of her depth. She asked what they were even talking about, and Bale replied that a whole month had already passed, and that she would soon be celebrating her 7th birthday. She didn't expect this from them, because she herself had forgotten that she would soon be 7 years old. Meanwhile, the boys were already at the round table, waiting for Lesha to approach them. What did she want to tell them privately? Eugene asked the girl not to rush, but Leonid, on the contrary, said that he was very busy today, so he asked her to speak faster. She hesitated a bit, then began to take 2 envelopes out of her pockets and handed them to her comrades. The boys looked at them intently, uncomprehending. Then the girl explained with a smile that it was an invitation to her birthday party. She explained that in a month, she too would be turning 7. Leonid called her a mere child, and how could she possibly be 7 years old? Lesya replied that their age difference wasn't that big. Leonid explained that a 2-year difference was like night and day. He'd almost forgotten about last year's party, even though it had been so lavish. Eugene asked if celebrating a birthday was really that important. Lesha thought about something she'd completely forgotten. Apparently, Duke Croix hadn't celebrated Eugene's birthday. She couldn't figure out what to say to him in this situation. Then Leonid saved her and said that, of course, for the children of aristocrats, celebrating a birthday is a mandatory event. He went on to say that in the past, many children died due to poor medical care. There was even a belief that if you survived your 7th birthday, you could live to old age. Lesha, trying to salvage the situation, laughed and said that sometimes this happens, sometimes not. It's even rarer when a child is very dear and hidden away to be raised quietly within the family. After all, they say that if you get too much attention from childhood, you won't live long. Leonid told Lesha that she doesn't know how to read a situation. In fact, this is all nonsense, and only fools say that you can judge whether a person will live to old age by 7 years. The girl thought that this boy was too eloquent. Isn't there a belief that death has no cue? Lesya took back her words and said that, in any case, since this was how it had turned out, she would definitely ask them to come, and they wouldn't have to prepare gifts. Leonid asked if she was telling the truth, and if she was refusing gifts, then fine. Lesya remarked that if he said so, she should definitely get something from him. But a heartfelt congratulation is still far more important than a gift. When Eugene heard about the gift, he thought about it. Meanwhile, the man was sitting at the table, and an employee approached him and said that the schedule report had already been completed. The Duke remarked that preparations for the birthday party seemed to be going very well. The bespectacled man asked if he had any further instructions, and the Duke chuckled in response. The Duke explained to his servant that he wanted to check the Treasury warehouse. The man immediately broke out in a sweat when he heard this. The Duke explained that Lesya would soon be 7 years old, so he intended to entrust her with the management of the family affairs. To begin with, 2 warehouses will be enough. And after she becomes an adult, it is necessary to create a safe place for her where she can freely live as a daughter of the family and not as a saint. The Duke added with all seriousness that this would be new for her, so he asked that everything be prepared so that she could adapt well. The man explained to his servant that this birthday would be her official recognition, so everything had to be absolutely perfect. The servant, bowing his head, replied that he had memorized everything and added that if that were the case, he would leave. He silently thought about preparing a grand birthday party for her and entrusting her with managing the money. He knew he valued the young lady, but he hadn't imagined it to that extent. One of the maids was nearby and told Mistress Veronica that something bad had happened. When the girl entered the room, the woman was standing by the mirror and said that it seemed like something bad had indeed happened. While she was gone, the atmosphere in the house had changed dramatically. She wondered if it was because of that girl her father had brought here. She clearly told her to live very quietly and behave like a mouse, but she did the exact opposite. The woman turned to the governess and asked her to tell her immediately what had happened during her absence and what trouble had happened here. It was Noah Elfanad's mother, Veronica Elfanad. The governess didn't know where to begin and said that a lot had happened during the time that Madame Veronica had been gone. She began to talk about the Duke and how he treated the adopted girl. She explained that not only had he given her the sapphire room instead of Noah, but he also wanted to grant her control of the funds. Veronica was simply shocked and surprised that he could give all this to some pathetic foster girl. And did the foster girl even know about it? The governess replied that no, and that the Duke seemed to have only given orders for everything to be prepared. Veronica suggested that they should then quickly spread the word so that everyone in the estate would know about it. The governess wanted to object to Veronica's position in such a situation if they did so, but the woman pointed a finger at her and told her to be quiet. She held her finger to her chin and talked about how they would season it with a little excitement and supposed care on her part. Once Veronica had carefully prepared her plan, she approached the door and knocked. The girl told her father that it was Veronica, and she needed to discuss something with him. The Duke immediately asked the girl to come in and said he had already received a detailed report on the negotiations. It had taken much longer than expected. Veronica apologized to her father and said there were so many other matters to resolve, besides the negotiations, that the delay had occurred. The Duke responded that it was very good that she was focusing on work, but perhaps she'll also devote her attention to matters at the estate. Noah most likely missed his mother greatly, and Veronica replied that this was indeed the case. From now on, she'll devote much more time to matters at the estate. And by the way, recently there have been disturbing rumors circulating in the ducal estate that are worrying her greatly. Everyone was talking about how he wanted to entrust the young lady with managing his money. The Duke then asked what was so alarming about these rumors. Veronica continued to explain that she had initially thought the same as him, but it seemed the young lady's origins were becoming too hot a topic. The Duke listened attentively to the girl and began to get gradually more and more angry the more she was against this girl. She continued to talk about how there were even rumors that she was a saint and that the church was in cahoots with the Elfanads. When Veronica said this, she let go of her head and said that she certainly considered the young lady family since she was connected with the church, but she was worried that she would be harmed. Then the Duke, standing with his back to Veronica, said that in this case, such things definitely needed to be stopped immediately. The woman thought that her plan was very good and said that, as always, her father had made a very wise decision. The man turned to her and added that from now on, the girl would be in charge of the treasury, or rather, Lesya would be responsible for it, as planned. Veronica was absolutely shocked and exclaimed that the rumors would only get worse and more numerous. He needed to think about it again. The Duke turned to the woman and exclaimed that this was a decision made after much deliberation. If he gave Lesya the Silver River, Elfanad, as a birthday gift, then such absurd rumors about her being a puppet of the church would no longer arise. Veronica was completely shocked when she heard about the Silver River of the Elfanad Duchy. Isn't this a treasure passed down from generation to generation? Why give such a precious thing to an orphan whose origins aren't even known? The Duke immediately asked Veronica to be quiet. He explained that this child had suffered all sorts of humiliations until now, which he had been unable to stop in time, and lived in the darkest corner. Perhaps even the Elfanad family's Silver River won't be enough. Therefore, if new rumors were to surface, he would take responsibility for them, as her father had. He said this, looking into Veronica's eyes, and added that after such a statement, she still intended to dispute it, and he really didn't like that. Veronica was simply shocked, because this was the decision of the head of the ducal family of Elfanad. She bowed before her father and apologized for it. The woman remarked that it seemed she had become too preoccupied with her own concerns. She would gladly follow his orders. The woman thought to herself that Anna's report had been in vain. How could this girl have bewitched her father? Veronica exclaimed that she should then explain to the lady how to manage her money. The Duke replied that this was already entrusted to someone else entirely. He suggested Veronica join them for dinner that night. She asked why. She wondered if he'd found out she was squandering company funds left and right. The man said, looking into her eyes, that he had already told her once before that she needed to pay more attention to her home. Veronica replied that he knew that the Elfanadas always had a banquet at this time of year. The Duke explained to the girl that he was actually supposed to be a little earlier. But Noah, this child, wanted the banquet to take place on the day of her return. So he adjusted the banquet's time to accommodate her return, and he insisted she attend dinner tonight. Veronica bowed, indicating she understood, and that's how they said goodbye. When she went out the door, she leaned against it with a sad look and thought about something. She wondered what would happen to her if Lesya officially became Lady Elfanad at the banquet. Suddenly, her son saw her and started running toward her, calling her Mom. The woman immediately told Noah he shouldn't run so fast down the hallway. The boy apologized and explained that he wanted to tell her that there would be a family banquet that evening and asked if she would come. Veronica thought to herself that even if she became a lady, she would still be an adopted daughter. She would never compare to a true child of the family. Veronica said that of course she would come, since it was their reunion dinner and she had to be there. Noah was overjoyed and asked if she was really coming. They needed to have not only dinner, but also lunch together. Veronica smiled and said she needed to find out if he'd had any problems lately. She needed to find out and gather more information about Lesya. When her friends asked the girl if she needed anything, she immediately looked at them and replied that she didn't really need anything. They were surprised by this answer, and both asked if she really didn't need anything. Leonid, for his part, simply chuckled, looking at the girl. Then he turned to her again and asked her to think carefully, because she must need something. Lesya asked if he was pushing Eugene to do something again. She'd told him before that she absolutely had to get a birthday present from him. He recalled their last conversation, and the girl, too, began to wonder. But how could she ask Eugene for this? And of course, it was a joke, so she asked him to come empty-handed. Moreover, after her conversation with the Duke, she had more than enough things. But the Duke decided to send all the outfits she liked. The girl stood with a very thoughtful look and thought about the coins of paradise. She remembered that she'd previously spent everything on a strawberry booster. Repeating the four-leaf Clover Quest doesn't reward many coins, and there are restrictions. She wondered if she should go to another district and distribute more clover there. Would the Duke allow it? Were there any tasks that would pay a lot of money? Eugene noticed that Lesya looked very worried. Perhaps he should find her a birthday present himself. And what better gift would he give her? Perhaps herbal tea, which pairs well with dessert. Although no, If this is the Elfanad estate, it might be full of rarer teas. He wouldn't be able to buy a decent gemstone with the money he had. Leonid told his comrades that class was about to start, so they needed to concentrate. Leisha continued to walk around sadly and said that because of her thoughts, she ended up not even being able to listen properly to the lesson. All the tasks are a bit vague, and I should probably go outside and distribute the clovers. The boy asked the young lady if she had finished all her tasks yet. The girl couldn't figure out who this man was and remembered that he was the Duke's servant. She greeted him, and he asked if she could go with him for a while. The Duke wanted to discuss something with her alone. She became curious and asked if he wanted to discuss her salary. The Duke was already sitting at the table and told the girl that he was going to give her the position of manager. The girl was very surprised and exclaimed to the Duke that she was only 7 years old. The man replied with a smile that he knew about it. Of course, it would be difficult at first, so he would introduce her to another manager who would help her until she got used to it. Lesha thought that if this was a family of Elfanad's stature, the salary would have to be enormous. Could she be entrusted with such an important task? Lesha wanted to know why he had chosen her. The Duke replied that he had originally intended to entrust her with this task when she was a little older. But after talking to her that day, he thought about creating a place where she could feel comfortable. First of all, she needs to strengthen her position. The girl listened attentively to the Duke, worried about such an important decision. Only Elfanad can perform this work, and there's no more secure position than that. The Duke said he certainly wasn't forcing her, but since it was part of a family member's job, he would undoubtedly be able to provide her with further support in any direction. Besides, it's the surest way for everyone to recognize her as Lisa Elfanad. But whatever she wants, he will always support her. The girl still wondered how she could entrust such a large sum of money to a 7-year-old. What if she took it on and screwed it up? And what reproaches she'd hear from Axel. Licia stood in front of the system's screen, and the customer was the god of thrift. The girl realized this was a time-limited task. Why was the reward so good? And if she didn't accept it now, she wondered if it would be revoked. The Duke told Lesha that if she wanted another job, she could ask. But the girl replied that she would do it. She thought to herself that this task would involve financial support, and then she would accept it. Because when she grew up, she would have to properly fulfill the duties of a member of the Elfanad family. She's young now and can rely on the Duke, but because of that, she'll likely constantly look up to him. The girl told the Duke that if he truly entrusted this to her, she would study very hard. Sometimes she looked like a real child, and sometimes she looked like an adult. Licia thought she'd expressed her thoughts too cleverly. The Duke asked her to remember one thing. No matter what happened, if she was going through a hard time, she would always have a place to return to and unburden herself. The man asked if she understood him, and the girl told the Duke that she did. When she was alone, she realized she had somehow gotten herself into something enormous. But for now, she'll be managing with an assistant to learn everything. The reward for the mission she accepted earlier was quite substantial. We need to get back to the room quickly and check everything properly. Veronica suddenly appeared in front of the girl and cast a careful glance at her. The woman asked the girl where she was rushing to in such a hurry, since there was still time before the evening banquet. She began to remember that woman who told her to live as if she were dead, because no one needed her in this house. When Veronica finished speaking, the girl asked her who she was. The woman was simply shocked by such a question and looked at the girl with a contemptuous gaze. Veronica told Lesha that, no matter what, everyone in the estate needed to be known. The girl exclaimed that it was true. She remembered, and the woman was Mrs. Veronica. She had been absent for a long time recently, and she probably didn't recognize her because her manner of speech had changed so much. The woman thought it was probably on purpose. Licia asked her if she could go if she had nothing else to say. She had something to do. Veronica asked what the matter was and said she could help if there was anything. The girl exclaimed that no, and that this was something she had to do herself. Veronica decided that it was most likely because this was the matter that the Duke had entrusted to her. Did he really finally hand over the management of the Treasury to this little girl? And so quickly? As she thought, she'd have to figure it all out herself. What could an adopted girl like her do? Licia didn't listen to this woman, but ran off to do her business, as she needed to quickly resolve everything and begin the task. He has no right to claim the Elfanad's glory for himself. The woman remained stern-faced and began to rage at the girl. She turned to her and asked her to listen carefully. Just because she formally entered the Elfanad household as an adopted daughter doesn't mean she's truly become an Elfanad person. It would be problematic if she harbored foolish delusions and the Duke simply fulfilled the temple's insistent request. So let her live here as if she were dead from now on. There's no one in this house who would welcome her. Veronica asked if she understood, and the girl replied that she did. Then she said that was good, and asked her to finish cleaning properly. Licia was delighted that she'd gotten the drop on her too. Veronica's face was a sight to behold, and the girl immediately burst out laughing. When the woman left, she happily crossed the room and approached the system monitor, peering into it. The girl decided to check the quest she'd just received. It said it was too wasteful, and that saving should start with the ones closest to her. Lesia continued to stare at the screen and chuckled, thinking that she hadn't noticed it back then, but now she was looking and seeing everything. But the lives of only those people depended on it. The girl closed her eyes and said that if she'd known what the contents were, she would have turned down the job as manager of the internal treasury. She fell for the word limited. Suddenly, laying off so many people was completely absurd. Licia considered putting this matter off for now. She sensed someone behind the door and asked who it was. They told her it was Noah. She immediately opened the door to the boy, and she became curious why he suddenly came, and she asked Noah what happened. The boy's eyes glistened with tears, and he asked when she had become so close to his mother. Lessa asked if he was talking about Mrs. Veronica. They had just exchanged a bunch of barbs, and what was he even talking about now? They spent time together for the first time in a long time today, and she kept asking about her. This woman even does this in front of her own son, and she felt a little awkward. Lesha immediately began to calm the boy down and said that it was because she was simply interested in what his mother was doing. She must be reacting this way because she's been asking a lot of questions lately. Noah, with tears in his eyes, asked if she was telling the truth. The girl replied that, of course, it was true. On the contrary, Mrs. Veronica talked more about him. She felt like she was lulling a baby to sleep. They'd only recently managed to mend fences with Noah after the last time, and now they'd almost had another fight. Licia asked him not to be angry, and he asked why he was angry. The boy, crossing his arms over his chest, told the girl that he certainly wasn't angry, since Lesha was his aunt. The girl told Noah that he was better than most adults. Licia noticed that she truly felt tenderness, and wondered if this was her aunt's feeling. For some reason, the expression on her face irritated him. He approached the girl and said that even if she was his aunt, the seat next to his mother at dinner tonight was his. Lesia replied with a smile that of course it was his, and that it wasn't exactly an attractive spot for her. Meanwhile, many dishes were already ready for dinner, which began 3 hours later in Elfanad's house. The table was already set and the guests were seated. The girl wondered if the Duke had arrived yet. Although he's been working a lot lately, he must be very busy. Veronica suddenly approached the girl. She said that it seemed the Duke was preparing a birthday present for her, and had she thought about what she would do when she received it? Licia doesn't even know what she'll get yet, but she already has to think about it. The girl said she'd probably say thank you first. Veronica asked if she really intended to accept him as is. She again asked the girl to listen carefully. Refusing a gift at least twice is a rule of etiquette. But what etiquette is she talking about if Lesia is a commoner, so her parents couldn't teach her manners? It's no wonder she doesn't know much. Veronica said that if she wanted to learn more about etiquette and aristocrats, she should come to her. If that proved too much of a hassle, she could turn to Noah. She added, looking at her son, that he was smart and could explain everything well. Noah replied that of course he would help. Licia thought to herself that right in front of her own son, she had just made a veiled criticism of her. But she thinks the boy doesn't understand this. Then, as a former commoner, she'll tell him straight out. The girl remarked that she actually had parents now and was being raised well. Veronica responded by asking Lesha not to hide anything. The fact that she was abandoned near the temple is a well-known fact, and the absence of parents is not something to be ashamed of. She looked at her son and asked if he thought so too. Noah had no choice but to support his mother. Licia now finally understood the boy's behavior. Everything he did to her, he simply learned from his parents. That's why she can't just let it go. And the more she thinks about it, the angrier she gets. Lesha asked Mrs. Veronica if she was prepared to stand by her words. The woman asked what exactly she meant. Responsibility for denying that the Duke was her father. But there's a big difference between a biological child and an adopted one. Leisha asked Noah if she wasn't family to him. The boy seemed cornered and didn't know what to say. But to the girl's surprise, he exclaimed that Leisha was their family. Veronica didn't expect even Noah to be there for her. Axel, sitting next to her, thought about how he didn't even have to help her. They announced that His Grace the Duke was entering. He said that Noah was right, and that everyone whose name was entered into the Elfanad registry was family. The Duke explained to the children that quarrels between family members are unacceptable, especially since even children try so hard. He lowered his head, closed his eyes, and said that adults in the house should especially set an example. When he finished this sentence, he looked at Veronica and asked if she understood. The woman told her father that she understood and would remember it. The Duke announced the opening of the dinner and asked everyone to begin eating the prepared food. After dinner was over, Lesia came out of the room and, catching her breath, said that she was very full. She thought to herself that Veronica had her fill, and the food was delicious, and this was simply the best evening. She decided to move on and knocked on Axel's door. The girl wanted to ask after dinner, but he disappeared so quickly that she missed the moment. She wanted to ask Axel if he was okay, but then she saw Eugene standing in front of her. Lesia hadn't expected such a turn of events. The girl leaned over to the boy and asked what he was doing there. She asked if he was okay, and Eugene smiled and replied that he was. Leisha asked where her older brother had gone and what he was doing there alone. Eugene explained that he had been studying before the mentor left for dinner. He just went into his study for a bit to get some books. Leisha realized why Axel had left right after dinner. It was precisely because of Eugene. The boy explained that he was simply grateful for the magic lessons and thought it would be nice to at least clean the room. Suddenly, he heard Lesha's voice and immediately went to the door. Clearly, he was having a hard time too. The girl helped Eugene carry his books and said it was hard to study until so late. She asked if his teacher was too strict. The boy replied that he wasn't and that he wanted to study on his own. Lesia reflected on Eugene's immense thirst for knowledge. Perhaps he could offer some advice on the quest. The girl turned to the boy and asked him to listen to her. She would ask him a question, and he should try to answer it. Eugene asked what question she wanted to ask. Lesha asked him what he would do if he had the omnipotent power to find happiness. But on one condition. Happiness would have to be taken from others. The boy asked if there was a right answer to this question. Lesha replied that there was both. Axel suddenly appeared and said that of course. First of all, he himself is important, so it's right to take everything for himself. Leisha saw her mentor and asked how he'd answered without even thinking, and how heartless he really was. Axel asked the girl what kind of manners it was to call her brother heartless. The boy explained that he was making this choice because he was ready to take responsibility for the consequences. Axel looked closely at Leisha and explained to her that she was too young to understand his intentions. The girl thought about how he was now playing the big brother in front of Eugene. He asked her to grow up first. Leisha ignored the boy and asked Eugene what he thought about it. The boy replied that he thought the teacher's words were somewhat true. Leisha remarked that it didn't matter if his thoughts differed from hers, and that she asked him to speak calmly. Eugene thoughtfully said that if, after taking away this happiness, it were returned twice as much, then wouldn't everyone be able to be happy? Axel listened attentively to this entire conversation and wondered what would happen if the words of these two were combined. Suddenly, a brilliant idea occurred to the girl, and she exclaimed that it was time for her to go. She smiled and thanked them both. After all, they were in class now, and she'd told Eugene they'd see each other in the ivory tower. Axel thought she'd said only what she wanted and then disappeared. While he was thinking about this, Lesia turned to him, calling him older brother. She asked her friend not to give her too much homework. Lately, Eugene has only been studying and barely plays with her. When the girl said this, she turned around and said that she was already leaving. When she closed the door, Axel looked at the boy in surprise and asked if he had complained to her while he was gone. Eugene immediately exclaimed in fear that of course not, and he could give him even more different tasks. He really enjoyed studying under him and called him Mr. Axel. The boy replied that it was good, and he would take note. And by the way, sharing happiness is a rather unexpected answer. Back then, it seemed like he had no time for such thoughts. Eugene explained that he thought Lesha would do exactly as he said. If it was her, she'd shared her hunting spoils with the poor before. He thought he was the only one who knew her so well. The boy stood in the middle of the room, pensively clenching his fist. Axel turned to him and said that today he would have double homework and crossed his arms over his chest. The boy didn't expect this turn of events and asked to increase the difficulty a little so that he could study even harder. And so the next day arrived. Lesha was brought all the contracts with Elfanad's servants that she had requested. The girl exclaimed that there was a whole huge mountain of them. The guy who brought them asked if she needed anything else. She'd been trying so hard since the first day, and he was worried it would be difficult to help the child. But perhaps it's worth hoping for a little bit of hope in her enormous efforts. Lesha told the guy she had one question for him. The boy smiled and asked which one, and she showed him some papers. Lisa asked if it was possible to do this using her powers as Treasury manager. When the boy looked at the list, he said it was possible, but doing so would cause an uproar in the estate. She's still so young, so he should really talk some sense into her. Lesha made another list and asked if that was possible too. When the guy approached this list, he broke out in beads of sweat and said that it couldn't be called impossible. Lesha couldn't understand whether this was possible or not and stared at him, waiting for an answer. It seemed like if he told her he couldn't, she'd burst into tears. So the boy laughed, so as not to upset her, and thought about how best to explain it. He looked at the notes even more closely and asked them to wait. He remarked that this was a completely unexpected approach. Most likely, only a child could have come up with such an idea. He asked the girl if she could wait a little while, and he would bring her a stamp for her signature. Lesya was overjoyed and exclaimed that she had succeeded. The system reported that the God of Economy quest was successfully completed, and at the same time, all of Elfanad's servants were dismissed. A maid knocked on the mistress's door and said it was Anna, and she wanted to tell her something urgently. The girl continued to knock loudly on the door. Veronica asked her to come in, a cup of tea in her hands. She asked what had happened this time. Anna explained that she thought she should know about it. She explained that Lady Lesha had just fired all of Elfanad's servants and then rehired them. Veronica replied that this was a pointless idea. Could she really have come because of a childish prank and caused such a commotion? Anna replied that she had thought so too at first. But after their dismissal, she questioned the servants about their grievances and, taking into account their suggestions for improvement, reinstated them under new, fairer contracts. Everywhere there's talk of nothing but the mistress. The servants thank her for this from all sides. In fact, some of them have even begun to say that it would be a good thing if the mistress became the head of the family. Veronica immediately, very rudely, put the cup of tea on the table and said that, judging by everything, this girl's insolence was going beyond all bounds. The woman clenched her fists and said that as the eldest in the house, she should say a few kind words to her. Lesha was very happy and ran down the hallway humming songs. She thought about how she had been called so suddenly and how she thought she was about to be scolded. The Duke sat in his chair and explained to the girl that the assistant had said that before making a decision about cash, she had tried doing the work of servants. He smiled at his daughter and exclaimed that this was a wonderful approach. Lesha initially thought that he would scold her, but now she was pleased because the Duke himself had just personally praised her. She'd earned a whole bunch of paradise coins, and now she could buy a whole bunch of things without any worries. Lesya laughed and talked about how the whole day had been full of pleasant events. Suddenly, Veronica appeared in front of her and said that the man who managed Elfanad's finances was running around the corridors like this. When a young lady behaves so recklessly, she can't help but worry. Lesya thought she should have run into the very person she least wanted to see. Veronica said they said she fired the mansion's servants and then renewed their contracts. The girl replied that this was exactly what happened. The woman continued to say that employment contracts are essentially rules established by Elfanad. If everything is changed so casually, wouldn't the House of Elfanad be known as two-faced? The girl looked closely at Veronica and asked if she meant to say that everything should have been left as it was. Leisha explained that the contracts were outdated and needed to be updated. The Duke also said everything was fine. Veronica asked if she really thought everything was okay and she'd done the right thing. She said that everything was fine, and before, she'd just been an adopted daughter who cleaned warehouses. And now, when everyone around her is showering her with gratitude, she must have imagined herself to be an important person. But if she blindly trusts people and becomes arrogant, it will create problems for her and will always be so. Will she be able to make the right decisions in the future? Leisha thought that this was her aunt again and asked if it was all true because she didn't know about it. The girl thought that she was starting to get tired of her. So she needed to be wary of people like Veronica. Since she had to be careful, the girl looked at her and said, "I think she'll go," and then leaned down in front of her. Veronica asked what she was saying now, as she hadn't finished yet. Leisha realized that no matter what she did now, she would still be stuck with her. So the most natural thing to do was to run away before she got caught. Because of her relationship with Noah, she can't act abruptly, and it's best to just ignore this woman. The girl noticed servants ahead and tried to hide from them as quickly as possible. She decided to turn to Madame Veronica. Leisha smiled at the woman and said she didn't look very well, so she asked if she could take a 4-leaf clover. She asked if Veronica would accept a gift from her. Since things have turned out this way, she should at least maintain her reputation properly. The quest is like a bonus. Leisha said she knew she was worried about the estate, but she was also trying hard to follow her assistant's advice. When the maids saw the young lady, they thought she was giving Mrs. Veronica the clover. Leisha seemed overly worried about everything. The woman took the 4-leaf clover from her and thanked her for it. The girl was surprised that she actually accepted it. Although, apparently, there was no need to deliberately ruin her reputation among the servants. Leisha also laughed demonstratively and said that she would continue to count on her. This was said for the sake of her personal reputation. Veronica, of course, took the 4-leaf clover, but her face was very stern, and she suddenly dropped the leaves. She exclaimed that this damned adopted daughter had dared to make fun of her, and how dare she do such a thing. The woman turned to the maid, Anna, who immediately said she was at her service. Veronica looked at the maid and told her to contact Gallio immediately. Anna couldn't understand, and then asked if she was talking about the young Duke Gallio. The woman answered Anna, looking menacingly at her, that she knew she didn't like to be told twice. The maid immediately said that she would do as she was ordered. After giving this order, Veronica told the maid she could go. She knew Veronica wasn't particularly fond of Lady Leisha, but she hadn't imagined it would be to this extent. Getting involved with the Duke, from whom she's long been divorced, is too much. What does the lady plan to do with this girl? Meanwhile, in front of us is Lesia's bright, shiny room. The girl was standing next to her piglet, asking if he was ready to eat his fill. He answered with a small grunt. The system presented the girl with a monitor that asked her whether she wanted to receive coins, and she pressed the affirmative button. She asked the pig to eat as much as he wanted. With that many coins, I'll have to worry about the subscription fee. And Leisha smiled contentedly. Suddenly, she heard some noise in the yard and looked out the window. She wondered what it was and why the weather had suddenly changed. Tanakis, that scoundrel has done a lot of damage and is still hiding. The weather god said he understood everything back when he started this whole thrifty mess. We need to strike him with lightning immediately. The god of flights said that she was the first subscriber in several years, and if this continued, she might not accept any of their orders. The god of harvest said that she was just planning a quest for the harvest season in the human world, and that under these circumstances, it would be very bad. Leisha decided it was all because of that miser's quest, and that the god of thrift had to leave immediately. The boys were asked to calm down immediately. A girl with 2 wings appeared and said she had a good idea. Then the boy asked the person in charge of subscription rebirth what the idea was. The girl thought that since it was difficult to return already issued coins, she could create a situation where they would be needed and force people to use them. Put a product on the heavenly market that your subscriber can't refuse. She'll take everything from here to there, and that sounds pretty good. If everything is done correctly, the subscriber will spend everything herself, and this is the best solution. The girl decided to put everything on the market, all the goods she wouldn't mind paying for, and she clapped her hands with joy. anything that could tempt a subscriber. Licia, watching this, thought that perhaps it was because of the quantity. Absorption takes a long time. Looking at her piglet, she thought that just seeing so many coins was already nice. And could this really be the life of a rich person? She glanced at the Celestial advertisement. The Celestials had learned she'd received the coins and were panicking. The louder the message, the more desperate the advertisement seemed. Licia apologized for not needing anything urgent and pressed the button. Celestial advertising was only for saints, and bulk deliveries to the heavenly market were discounted. Life could be changed with coins. Licia couldn't understand what had happened. She'd said she wouldn't buy it and accidentally clicked on a heavenly ad. She couldn't figure out what it was and decided to just watch. What if she found something very useful in front of her? When she looked, she saw a portable altar from the main temple, still in its packaging. It was very convenient and essential for donations. With it, you don't have to go to the temple every time to make donations, and that was very tempting. Meanwhile, in heaven, the guys noticed a subscriber carefully examining a certain item, a portable altar. The god of laziness laughed and said he was talking about how the subscriber would buy his product first, and she clearly liked to take the easy way out. The god of heart responded with a grin and tears in her eyes, saying she wasn't even looking at her product. The girl with wings asked everyone to calm down because this was not a competition. After purchasing, she looks at other products. And this is very good. Just let them look at this. What kind of goods are these? Probably the same ones one of the gods had put on display. Another replied that his wares were too useless. The winged girl looked away and asked what it was. Shirless replied that the subscriber had already left the heavenly market, and they were very surprised. They should have put something better up for sale, but Tanakis was still silent. The boy lying on the cloud replied that he had already left. Meanwhile, Lesia said that she didn't really need it right now, so she would just put the item in her cart for now. The girl looked closely at the box and said she'd start with a portable altar. She thought to herself that it would be better not to donate a lot of coins at once, but to extend her subscription gradually. Suddenly, she needs to buy some expensive item, and she decided to start with a 10-year extension. The girl approached her pig and asked for 900,000 coins. The pig immediately began answering and handing her coins. Licia clasped her hands and thought of her gratitude to the gods who dwell in the heavens. She greeted them a second time, especially grateful this time to the god of economy. Thanks to them, she became rich in coins, and next time she'll definitely ask them for such tasty quests. The donation completion message hadn't appeared yet. She still hadn't figured out whether reselling on the celestial market was possible. The prices of the goods on display are very high, and if you can't resell them, it's too difficult to decide to buy them, and this was very difficult for her. Now it's time for the donation reward draw, and information appears on the screen before it. The donation reward lottery has been launched, and the odds of winning increase proportionally to the number of coins donated. Licia thought about the video. She'd already tried this last time, and some object had appeared in front of her. The girl didn't understand what it was. She'd just been bombarded with advertisements, and now a card combination had appeared. When she saw the hidden effect, she thought about it. If she combined the new card with the one she'd been using so far, the girl became curious about what would happen. That's why she had to follow her intuition. Or you can use hidden effects simultaneously and combine a good one with another, which would be a double reward. Lesia decided to play combination cards. She activated the draw and received a very rare sacred card. This intuitive premonition of a legendary card triggered a hidden special effect and increased the likelihood of intuition and quests that could increase her affection level. She donated more than before. So why was the probability so low? The girl began to pray and said that she had donated far more coins, and could they have made a mistake in their choice? Was it really just luck? Lesha looked at the door and heard the maid say there was something urgent that needed to be said. The girl asked to wait a bit, as she was curious and decided to test the card's effect properly later. She told the maid she could come in now, and the maid, opening the door, exclaimed that something bad had happened. Part of the treasury she manages suddenly disappeared. Lesha was simply shocked and asked how this could have happened. The maid explained that a Van Dale painting had disappeared, along with a 40-carat pink diamond and a ruby ring. A small amount had also been stolen, so it was highly likely that it was someone from within the household. But this had never happened before. Leisha, too, couldn't understand why the treasury had suddenly been robbed. She had a sudden, intuitive premonition, and her intuition suddenly sparked. She needed to look around carefully, and perhaps she'd find something. Lesia found a fallen hair and wondered whose it belonged to, as it was a rare color. The boy remarked that there were too many servants in Elfanad. It would be difficult to find the culprit based on hair alone. This was expected, but perhaps he could report it to the Duke immediately. The maid mentioned that the Duke was away. Leisha decided it was probably time to buy that very thing. The girl had already reached the heavenly market and was looking for what she had clearly put in her basket. Lesia found it and finally decided to buy it. A heavenly object appeared before her, an all-seeing magnifying glass. It looked like any ordinary magnifying glass, but if you focused the lens on an object, it would analyze its precise composition. The system reported that it doesn't affect living beings. It might be possible to find the hair's owner with its help. She foolishly found a hair of Anna's maid, and Leisha was very surprised when she learned about it. Who was Anna? And was she the same maid who had just spoken to her? So this is Madame Veronica's maid, and several hours have already passed. Veronica said with a wry smile that it was confusing. Suddenly showing up and asking to speak to her maid alone. She apologized to the girl and said that Anna was her person. Whatever the case, proper etiquette would have been to first ask permission from her owner. Leisha replied that in that case, she was going to tell her straight to her face. She needed to ask Anna something about the treasury she managed. The girl continued to explain that some of the treasury's items had been stolen. Veronica asked what this had to do with Anna. Is she afraid the Duke will reproach her and try to shift the blame to anyone? If so, she asks him not to worry too much. Even if she reports it to the Duke, he won't scold her too harshly. Children often create and lose things. If she apologizes and refuses to manage things in the future, she'll help her. Veronica was simply shocked when she saw the girl laughing. Lesia showed her the hair Anna had left behind. The woman laughed to herself and thought about how the girl was so confident because of one hair. She was very cunning, but she was still a child, to suspect just because their hair color matched. Veronica asked if she was making fun of her now. What she said to her maid in front of everyone was tantamount to an insult to her. Leisha asked in response if she was saying that the manager should remain silent for the sake of the other party's honor. Even if Mistress Veronica had used the maid to steal funds, the woman became very angry and asked what she had just said. From a common-sense perspective, it was impossible for a maid to plan everything alone. Lesia explained that the volume was also too large for one person to handle. The girl turned to the assistant and asked if she was telling the truth. The boy replied that it would indeed be difficult to steal all of this alone. The missing items include a Van Dale painting, an Ottoman bronze helmet and gilded armor, 2 marble sculptures, plus parts of ancient gold coins, and a brooch with an emerald stud. But only the pink diamonds and the ruby ring were missing. Leisha pressed her finger to her lips. She said she hadn't said exactly what was missing. Only the assistant Lily and she knew about it. The criminal whom the girl had just exposed in front of everyone had just been found. Lesia thoughtfully said that it wasn't entirely clear who was worse, the one who ordered it or the one who actually stole it. The girl suddenly turned to a maid named Anna and asked what the maid thought about what she had just said. If she lied now, she'd immediately go to hell. Before the girl could finish speaking, the maid fell to her knees and began begging for forgiveness. The maid began to explain that she was simply doing as Mistress Veronica ordered. She gave everything she had stolen to her mistress. She began begging for forgiveness again. The guys standing nearby weren't expecting this, but they were glad the culprit had been found. Thus, thanks to the confession of the maid Anna, the case of the theft from the internal treasury was solved, and the truth came to light. As the girl walked down the corridor, she heard many rumors and truths that were said about Mrs. Veronica. The servants quickly spread the rumors throughout the estate. Lesia decided to go elsewhere. There was no point in going there, and Veronica's punishment was the loss of all powers as mistress of the house. The Duke probably made this decision with Noah in mind. Even though she's a villain, she's still this boy's mother. However, even after learning the truth about what kind of person his parent was, will he be able to still love her? The girl, thinking about this, didn't know what would actually happen. But now, she just wants Noah not to be hurt. A guy appeared in front of her and said he was just looking for her, and she recognized his voice. Servian activated his movement magic. It seems the investigation into the flute is complete. That's what he came to tell Lesia.